Hello and welcome to The Long View, a podcast that takes a closer look at the games people play. The Long View is a proud member of the Dice Tower Network. Be sure to go to dicetower.com and check out all the resources that are available there for you. Whether you're looking for another fantastic podcast that suits your general preferences and interests, whether it's another review from Tom Vassell or Z or Eric Summer, whether it's the latest top 10 list, you'll find tons of resources available for you at dicetower.com. Check them out. The Long View is also generously sponsored by GameSurplus.com. GameSurplus.com is a phenomenal resource for you for online board gaming purchases. They have truly spectacular customer service. It is always prompt. It is always courteous. Thor and his family will always do their best to find whatever it is you're looking for, even if it's something that's out of print. You may think that they just weren't able to find it, or they just couldn't get you a copy from Germany, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you'll get an email saying, hey, guess what? We were able to get a copy of this game for you. Do you still want it? And just as quick as lightning, they'll have it shipped off to you. It's that kind of level of customer service and dedication to serving customers that makes Game Surplus truly exceptional. So the next time you're thinking about buying a board game, whether it's one that we're covering here on the podcast or another one, please be sure to consider GameSurplus.com. And if you do order from them, please be sure to tell them the Longview sent you. I'd also like to send a special shout out to my local game store. The Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania is a fantastic resource for gamers in the northeastern Pennsylvania, northern New Jersey, southern New York region. They have a rapidly growing stock of board games, including Caverna, which just arrived in the shop not too long ago. They have a vibrant Magic the Gathering and Pokemon and other collectible card game scene, and they have dedicated board game demo nights and other services for those of us who love board gaming. The Gamer's Edge is conveniently located on Main Street in Stroudsburg, right off of Route 80. So if you're in the area, please be sure to stop by. Tell them the Longview sent you. And if you come on a Monday night, perhaps you'll catch myself or Lloyd there, where we're going to be demoing the latest and greatest of games. That's the Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. My name is Jeff Gamble. I'm the host of The Longview, and today I am very pleased to be joined once again by Joel Eddy. Eka Mouse on Board Game Geek, but perhaps best known for his wonderful drive-through reviews series and his drive-through blog, very active in the community and a frequent guest here on the show, I'm very happy to say. So, Joel, I want to say hello, and thank you very much for agreeing to join me tonight.
My pleasure as always, Jeff. Thanks for having me back.
Not a problem at all. It's always a treat to get the chance to talk to you. And this episode, truth be told, was actually a little inspired by you, and I believe it was Lance. You guys were, yeah, I know. Yeah, as soon as you say Lance, you got to say, uh-oh. Anyway, you guys were talking on one of your shows, one of your sort of Wooden Cubes and Iron Soldiers live that you did. And you were speaking of solitaire games. And you gentlemen brought up Nemo's War, which is an older title from Victory Point Games. And I had seen it many times before, especially at the WBC, because Victory Point Games has a very strong presence there. But I had never had the chance to play it or try it. And after listening to you guys talking about the game and how enthusiastic you seemed about it, I had to check it out for myself. So I asked Victory Point if they would mind sending me a review copy of Nemo's War. And they said, well, you know what? We would love to do that because we're just about to announce a new printing of Nemo's War. We're going to give it the deluxe treatment that we've done for some of our games, like Circus Train, which I've done before here on the show and talked about. And I thought, oh, okay, that would be cool. That'd be exciting because the Nemo's War that, I'm thinking of is the sort of older style Victory Point game before their sort of new production and new facilities out there in California and everything kind of new and exciting that they're doing. So I was like, sure, please send me a copy. Let me check it out. And, if I get it and I'll play it a bunch of times and then, maybe do a review. And that's all I intended to do was just a review. But after playing it, I really was taken with this game. And so I wanted to have a chance to talk about it. And so you immediately popped back into my mind, and I was like, hey, wait a minute. I think it was Joel who really liked this game. So that's kind of my background and experience with why I got interested in this title. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe how you first became aware of the game and maybe a little bit of your history and background with Nemo's War?
Yeah, be honest, I don't remember how I became. No, I do remember. That's right. Sorry. I just remembered. Basically, I had gotten a review copy as well some time ago, and gosh, it must be a couple of years now. And I had just at the time sort of gotten my feet wet in terms of asking for review copies and that kind of stuff. And I sent an email to Victory Point Games and I said, "Hey, there's a couple of games that look interesting." And I had must have read somewhere Nemo's War is really cool, and I liked the theme of it. To be honest, I liked Captain Nemo with his Nautilus ship and all that kind of stuff. That's a cool thing. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And so I requested them a couple of games from there, and honestly, I think one of the other games was Zulus on the Ramparts, which is a game I really enjoy as well. And this one, and then like two games. They sent me like four games or something, and two games I don't remember. So, but those two stuck out: Nemo's War and Zulus on the Ramparts. And so, yeah, I just kind of, I had seen it and I was kind of lightly interested in it, and I knew that. I think I looked at the playing time and I knew it was a solitaire game, and I'm like, oh, man, I can play this and see if I like it. And it plays in about an hour, roughly. And so I was like, yeah, let me take a look at it. It's a different kind of solitaire game because I was getting a little bit tired of the States of Siege games, just because they're always like, some war or historical thing. And, I was like, Nemo's War, that's a fictional subject, but it looked interesting. So I was like, I wonder how they're going to treat this. And I was just really curious about it because it's not something you see games made about other than Cthulhu. You don't
Right.
see
Right.
novels turned into games or fictional subject. I mean, another one would be the Robinson Crusoe game. Uh, that really goes beyond the literary work, if you will, but it does have that sort of flavor of, um, the literary piece. And maybe I'm missing or forgetting some, but I don't think there's a whole ton of those. So that was kind of where my interest was piqued.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. There's not a ton of games out there that are really tied to a literary theme. I can think of a couple other ones. Another would be Friedman Freeze's Friday. That's got a little bit of a tie-in there.
Yep.
And I know, I think about games like there's one that's coming out right now, something to do with Shakespeare. I'm trying to remember the name of it.
Kill Shakespeare.
But yeah, Kill Shakespeare. Okay, that's got that a little bit of that theme kind of creeping in, but there's not a lot of games that really try to tackle that. So, yeah, this is definitely something that sets it apart. And the sort of curiosity that I had was the same as yours, which is okay. I remember the novel very hazily from when I was a kid, and when I read all the old classics. And I thought, okay, how are they going to do this? Because my kind of recollection of Captain Nemo and the Nautilus and the giant squid attack and things of
Mm-hmm.
that nature, and I thought, oh, this could be really kind of cool. And then what Victory Point did was they kind of folded that into this really interesting little solitaire game that feels, as you said, very different from the States of Siege games. Now, I haven't played a ton of those. I played Habsburg Eclipse, which I actually really enjoyed. I haven't played Zulu on the Ramparts yet. It's one that I'm hoping to get to relatively soon. And I know there's others like Ottoman Sunset and things of that nature. So I wasn't kind of looking at this as something new, as a departure. But when I played it, it was definitely a departure. It was definitely something very different. And I really kind of enjoyed the way the game was set up. So real briefly, for people who might not sort of be aware of the game, I just want to kind of give a brief little overview. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit more, Joel, about some of the things that really sort of stand out to us or that we find interesting, or maybe some areas that we find a little troubling as well. The first thing that I would say that sort of stands out to me is that this is a victory point game with sort of this huge map. This is a really large map. It's a trifold, if my memory serves me correctly, and you lay it out. And as you know, with a lot of victory point games, there's lots of charts and tables and things of that nature, which does not bother me. I know from a graphic design standpoint or maybe an art direction standpoint, there's some people that don't like those, but I'm the kind of guy who really does like functionality.
It's ugly, Jeff. You can call it ugly.
Well, I'm not going to say it's ugly, but it's not very inspiring. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of information.
Yeah.
Kind of thrown there. To me, the prettiest thing is there's some illustrations of ships and whatnot that are scattered about. But for the most part, it's charts and tables and whatnot. So.
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree it's not very pretty to look at, but it's extremely functional, which I like. So there's a kind of a UI kind of a guy in me that appreciates that about some designs. But what you basically have is you have like a very sort of abstract kind of map of the world. And, you can see the continents, but the continents really have nothing to do with anything. It's the oceans. And so the oceans of the world are kind of represented. You have your Pacific and your Atlantic and your Indian and whatnot. You have the Mediterranean. And then I think, is the Pacific divided, Joel? Do you remember? The Pacific, is that like west and east or something? Or I'm trying to remember.
I'd have to bring up the picture of the map, to be honest with you, because I have jettisoned my copy on the hopes of the second printing. So
of the second edition.
Yeah.
Okay, I found it. Yes, there's a western and an eastern Pacific side. And so you're going to kind of start off with your little counter, a little square, very serviceable but not very exciting, at least in the first edition, little cardboard counters. And it is just the Nautilus, right? So you see this little counter for the Nautilus. And you're going to put that in the ocean. And then each of the other oceans is going to be populated by some starting ships, right? Because each ocean is basically just a grid that can hold a certain number of ships. Each ocean also has like a treasure, right? That's like this sort of hidden or legendary kind of treasure that is just these round little treasure tokens. And so, what you're going to be doing during the game is you're going to be sailing from ocean to ocean. You are going to be trying to collect treasures. You are going to be trying to sink ships of these imperialist powers that are roaming the seas and threatening everybody and doing dastardly things, trying to, fight the power and all that, which is always a fun theme in a game. So you're hunting these other ships. You also might be working towards trying to liberate people who are oppressed, right? And that's one of the things about the game that's really, really interesting, is that there's different sort of victory conditions and different sorts of paths that you can follow in this game. So you can take the whole game trying to focus on treasure hunting and scientific achievement and discovery, or you can take the whole game about fighting the imperialist powers and sinking ships. Or you can play the whole game where you're trying to help people, incite people to liberate themselves and throw off the yoke of the oppressors. So, you kind of have in the back of your mind, pictures of, imperialist powers, in foreign lands, like, the English in India or what have you, right? So you're going to be kind of sailing around, trying to deal with these different kinds of goals and objectives depending on what you choose. And you, as the captain, kind of representing Captain Nemo, can choose right from the start of the game what you want to kind of shoot for. Or you can wait a few rounds. You can kind of see how the card play falls out, because there's a card element in this game.
Right.
And then kind of decide, okay, what do I want to go for? Do I think I have the best shot at getting victory points through scientific discovery, or through military, sort of attacking the other ships, or through liberation, right? But once you kind of pick and you commit yourself, and there's a certain point at which you must commit to one of these goals, and that's another really awesome part, little part of the game that we can circle back to later, that's going to kind of determine your win condition, your victory point total. Now, the things that are working against you in this game are the following. There are random events that are going to happen. There are things that are going to pop up that are going to force you to kind of pass a test. So it could be some sort of danger that your ship is going to have to survive. It could be an attack of a giant squid. I think there's a giant squid card in there.
Mm-hmm.
It could also be other ships, because one of the other things that's going to be this sort of relentless pressure in this game is the fact that if the oceans of the world ever fill up completely with Imperial ships, you've lost, like you're done, you're toast. All right, the game is going to end, and at that point you're going to try and total up your victory points and see how badly you lost. Is kind of the bottom line here. So trying to manage all these things, right? Trying to find some treasures for victory points, trying to keep the oceans clear, but maybe not going after everything, because there's a lot of risk in the combat of this game. It is not very cut and dry. There's a lot of randomness and chance, and that's something that we can come back to as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's some ways that you can mitigate that, but it still is usually a fairly risky venture when you attack, especially more powerful ships as the game goes on. And so your ship can be damaged. Your crew, you can lose crew. Nemo himself can become sort of crazed and unstable, and you're trying to balance all these things and gain victory points so that by the time the game ends, either at one of the game end conditions I was talking about, or with the final card that pops up called the Maelstrom card, you're going to kind of find out how well you did. This is one of those games where you're going to get a victory point total, and you're going to kind of consult a little, almost a narrative little kind of table, which is kind of fun, where it tells you how well you did and what happens. There are a myriad of nice little touches in the game that I really appreciate, that we can talk a little more in depth about later. This idea of upgrading your ship and how that's accomplished so that your ship becomes more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of time passing,
Yeah.
and how you manage your time in this game is really, really important. There's just so many little bits and pieces that I can't really necessarily go full into detail on. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of interesting decisions to be made in this game, and I was really pleasantly surprised by that. What about any of this, as I'm kind of talking through it and sort of refreshing your memory perhaps of the gameplay experience, since you are patiently waiting for your second deluxe edition? What about this? Were there any of these elements that you found particularly interesting or maybe problematic? What would you have to say?
Well, I mean, I think just to pick up from the beginning, we can talk about the look of the game. This is one of Victory Point Games' earliest games, I think. It's definitely early, on the early side. And as you were saying, everything is very functional. But if you take a look at the map, the first time you look, you're like, oh my gosh, there's tracks. There's like 3 tracks with circles, for the repair and the crew. And, there's a big track at the top that goes from 1 to 52. Then there's another big track at the bottom. There's a couple of charts, and there's charts strewn throughout the map. And you're like, this is just going to be a nightmare. And it really is not. I've found in my experience with playing a lot of these solitaire games that there's a real fine line between scripted, sort of rolling against charts, not really a lot of decisions, and, you kind of feel like you're on rails. It kind of tacks more towards simulation than game. But this really straddles the line nicely, and I feel like I'm playing a full-blown game. And as you said, the functionality of everything really makes things very quick to play. Once you get in and kind of get through that first game, you can, turn right around and then play your second game, and you're like, okay, now I've got a good idea how all the systems work, how I can exploit it, where I'm going to kind of push my luck and take my risks, and all the different sort of paths to victory. So it is very functional and readable and all that good stuff, but it is ugly as sin. And the component quality obviously is on the lower end side for the, I guess the current edition as we record this. Now, sounds like you have more of an inside track than me. on the second edition because I wasn't aware, that it was coming anytime soon. I
Right.
knew it was kind of in the pipeline for a while, and then when I first heard that, I was like, "Sweet," and promptly traded off my copy. And so I'm definitely waiting for this because we talked about doing this episode a few weeks ago, and I was like, "Oh, gosh, I wish I still had this. I could play it again." And but I would say on my first, I would say, but don't let that dissuade you. If you want to go out and pick this up and you don't want to wait for the second edition, because I really don't know when it's coming. It could be a year from now, from all I know. But um, if you want to go pick it up, or if you can find a trade for it, I would. I wouldn't let this dissuade you. The game that it reminds me the most of probably is Vinos, which is a game about making wine, and it's just a bunch of tracks everywhere. Um, But once you play the game, you're like, wow, this is super functional and very makes the gameplay very intuitive. And I think the same could be said for Nemo's War, where everything that everything represents makes sense. I say that's the first thing out of what you were talking about. And the one thing that you alluded to, let's talk about the combat. The one thing I really enjoy about the combat is as you uh, do combat, and as you sort of get, I don't remember what the track is called. It's on the bottom of the map, and it's got a little skull, and it's almost
Absolutely. It's a notoriety track. Yeah.
notoriety. I knew it was like a negative reputation, but you get notoriety with all of the world's navies, and as you do that, you kind of push the marker along as you do more combat, and then you get to a certain point, and then kind of the medium level ships get shuffled into the draw pile. And then if you go further along, then the harder ships come out, and then after a bit, then like all the ships get a bonus. So if you go after that combat or sort of that military victory, I guess it's a war victory, then things are just going to stack up against you. I like that. It's kind of this interlocking system of okay, you're going to go war. Well, the war is going to respond to you, and you're going to have to deal with that. Um, and so, but if you don't want to go war, you can kind of just cruise around and take your chances with the little frigates and freighters and passenger ships and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I like that the game kind of works that way. And like you said, one of the nooks and crannies of the thing was there's a thing where you can decide to focus on combat, or you can just kind of randomly do combat. Where so if you go into, let's say, the Atlantic Ocean and you want to combat the ships, well, they're all face down. You draw some from a pile, then they're face down. You know how many ships are in the different oceans, but you're not sure what they are. And then if you decide as you start combat, you're either going to stock, I think, a
Yep.
ship.
That's what it's called. Yep.
Yeah, if you stock it, then you can only fight one because you've been spending all your time stocking it. But you get a little bit of bonus to the combat, and it makes it a little bit easier. So I found that it was like a good idea early. It doesn't always work out, but you can stock your first couple of ships. It takes you a little bit of time, but it's almost like you're training yourself. And then as you kill a few ships, then you can take and salvage those ships and basically strip them for parts and upgrade the Nautilus. And then you kind of get to this threshold where it's like, okay, now I'm a little bit more beefed up, and I can go take out an ocean with maybe 3 ships on it and just not stock any of them because I already kind of built up some, uh, you know, capabilities, a plus to attack or whatever, different things like that.
Right. Right.
Um,
And one of the things I really like about that, Joel, is the idea that when you sink a ship, you have two choices.
right.
You can save that ship and put it into basically a victory point pile, where it is going to be earning you massive, VPs later. You basically keep track of the number of ships that you have sunk in each ocean, and
That's
the
right.
more you have sunk, the more victory points you're going to get. So it's really, really a strong pull to do that because it's one of the ways you win the game, whether you're focused on war or not. Ships can be worth quite a few victory points. They can be worth 2 or 3, and that's a lot in this game.
Hmm.
But the problem is that if you do that, then you don't have any parts for salvage, which is what you were just talking about.
Right.
So when I sink a ship, I immediately have a choice that I have to make. Do I keep this towards salvage so that I can upgrade my ship? As you said, strip it for parts, which is a great way to think of it. Just leave it all blocked somewhere. Or do I, turn it in for the VPs at the end of the game? And, that is not an easy decision. And that's one of the
Right.
things that you alluded to earlier that I like about this game. You are not on rails. There is not a I'm going to see what happens, or a lot of solitaire games. It's very much I'm going to see how long I can hold on, or I'm going to see, um, at how many turns I last, or something like that. This really kind of tells a much more complete story, in my opinion, because you're having to make a whole lot more really crucial decisions. Let me give you an example of another one, and you tell me if you agree.
Okay.
There are 3 counters in the game that are literally they're characters from the literature. There's the professor, there's Ned Land, and there's oh geez, I forget the third one. I'm not looking at that map anymore. Somebody Counciel or I don't know. Anyway, a third one, and these are 3 characters that were in the story. These characters you can use for die roll modifiers during combat or during a test or anything that you want, and they're powerful die roll modifiers. And there's one of the reasons why is because you can use them after you've already rolled. So you're not going to burn them in vain, right? You're not gonna say, oh, I'm gonna use this, and then you rolled like a 12 anyway, and you're like, oh, well, that was worthless because I didn't need it. So they're really powerful in that way. They can really swing a crucial moment in the game. But if you use them, you lose victory points. So there's like this trade-off. It's like, okay, if I use this person, well, if Ned Land escapes, well, then I've lost the victory points for having him. Or if this person dies, that's going to be a victory point penalty for me. But maybe it's worth it in the grand scheme of things, depending on what my goals are. So that's like just another example of these kinds of decisions that you have to make. And then you also have lots of decisions to make when you're about to roll your dice. When you look at the Nemo track, the crew track, and the hull track, these are 3 separate tracks that, depending on what the event or the test is that's happening to you, you can expend. Like they call it exert. You can exert your crew,
Right.
or exert your hull. Push your ship. I got like images of Scotty. I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. Right? I'm like you're you can exert your hull and your crew, or Nemo can get like really committed and focused and like all on it. But
Right.
then he might kind of go a little crazy. So when you choose to kind of expend those resources is a really crucial decision. Do I use it, or do I, take my chances on a die roll? And if it doesn't pan out, live to fight another day. What do I do? So I really enjoy those aspects of the game. Do you feel that these are the kinds of things that make it? Because I really like your analogy, where a lot of solitaire games you're on rails.
Yeah.
But this one reminds me a lot. This is going to sound crazy, but it reminds me a lot of the solitaire, game of Mage Knight. There's things to explore. There's things to do. You don't know exactly what you're going to run up against. You may or may not be equipped to deal with whatever ends up getting thrown at you, and you have some real decisions to make. What would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I get what you're saying. I think part of it is you have a map to explore as well here, and sometimes in solitaire games you don't really get a map. It's the map. There may be a picture of a map, but it's almost like a map is just another track. In this, there's hidden information. The treasures are hidden. The ships are hidden. Um, you know, and I'm trying to think. Like the other States of Siege games, there's just a bunch of tracks going into the middle. Um, I think of a game like what is it, D-Day? I don't think I've even played it, but D-Day something or other. It's one of the more popular solitaire games. It's got a map of the beach, but it's almost like tracks where you're setting your soldiers up. And so I think that lends itself to not feeling like you're just pulling a bunch of levers, but you're actually kind of draws you in physically sort of to this world. And I think that's a big part of it. And the whole idea of this that I haven't really seen in most solitaire games is this whole like 4 paths to victory in a sense. Because, like you said, you at some point you have to choose if you're going to kind of go science or war or anti-imperialism, and that's going to change how you score everything.
Absolutely.
So if you go science, your warships are only worth half of what their point value is. But if you go war, they're worth twice as many. But the science discoveries you may find are worth 10 points each, and the war, if you do war, they're worth 0. And so you're trying to get to a certain number of victory points no matter what you do, but you can sort of pick and choose, and you can kind of let the game kind of tell you based on sort of how things are going. Or you can set out and you can sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to try to get a war victory this time because, the last 2 times I played it, I got a science victory. And I feel like I kind of know how to do that. And I know how it's going to kind of play out if I'm going to succeed or if I'm going to fail. You can kind of get used to it playing it a certain way.
Absolutely, yeah,
And
yeah.
it gives you a lot of room to explore some different things. Like, if you're doing war, it's like, okay, well, what is the best way to do war? What is the best way to tech up my ship? And what order should I fight these ships in? And when should I do the stalking? And when shouldn't I do the stalking? And how can the treasures, not automate, augment this strategy? And you can really kind of go down that path and learn a lot more about that sort of system in the game. And now that you've learned a little bit more about combat, you can say, okay, well, I'm going to do science, and I've kind of got combat under my belt, and I kind of know how that's going to work out. So you can really kind of replay the game several times, where a lot of times with a solitaire game, they don't give you that exploration as much, um, at least as obvious as it is in this game.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something else that speaks to what you're talking about is each of these victory conditions. One of the things I really like about this game is that each of these victory conditions feels very, very different.
Yes. Yeah.
Whipping around the oceans, trying to get treasure tokens is something that is, it's not easy to do. It takes you time to sail from this ocean to the next ocean to the next. There are cards that come up, and there's a really kind of a nifty system that's used to determine whether or not there's kind of going to be a event or something that's going to happen. That's based on sort of the previous turns. So eventually, some things are going to happen. Some things are going to populate and going to pop out on the board. Some things are but you have
Right.
time to sort of plan. But the one that really sticks out to me is that liberation track, because again, for such a small game with minimal components, you have a really interesting dynamic, which is you have to burn your treasure. You have to use your treasure. I
Right.
found treasure. I have money. I have to actually spend that treasure in order to try to incite people to revolt and liberation, right? So I'm like funding these liberation movements with my treasure. And every time that I'm willing to do that, I'm going to have the opportunity to kind of move up this liberation track. So, yes, is there another track on the board? Yes, there's yet another track. But the way that works is really interesting because you're going to be taking a look at that value of that treasure, and then you're going to be rolling a die, and depending on the differential, I forget the exact formula, but there's one there, and it's very easy. It's not like too mathy. Depending on the differential between the value of the treasure and your die roll is going to tell you how far up this liberation track that you're going to move. And so I find that to be like really, really interesting. It gets harder and harder to push people past that tipping point as you move up that track because of the formula that's there to, incite people towards liberation, right? So I find that to be a really interesting kind of mechanism, and yet it never is impossible because, like many of the systems in this game, if you roll a 6, it's going to be like an automatic success on the liberation track. If you roll a 1, it's an automatic failure, right? And I believe it works that way
Yeah.
with combat as well.
I gotta say, I hate that rule in games, but go ahead.
Do you really?
I
Okay.
can't
Well, I
stand
I
auto
like it.
ones and auto sixes, and I hate it. I
I
can't
like
handle
it.
it.
Well, the only reason I like it, and then I want to hear you tell me why you dislike it so much.
Okay.
The only reason that I like it in this game is because the mathematics eventually can work against you. And so, you can reach a point. I think if you don't have that in there, you can reach a point of frustration where you're like, okay, how many of these stinking treasure tokens, each of which is worth victory points, do I have to give up before I finally roll the freaking number that I have to roll to move this stupid track up? So sometimes to me, it's nice when you have something baked in there that you're never totally guaranteed that you're going to, succeed, but you're also never totally guaranteed that you're going to fail. So I kind of find that that works in this game for me. What is it that you dislike about that so much, that mechanism?
Yeah, and it's got nothing to do with the game in particular, but I just don't. I just, to me, I hate that some games use it and some games don't. Like, I honestly have had moments where I've played a game and I'm like, oh yeah, I rolled a 1. Is that rule in this game? Is it 1 an automatic failure? Is it not? Like right now, I'm trying to think of another game, and I'm like, 1's an automatic failure in Eclipse, right? I don't know if you remember or not, but I think in Eclipse, if you roll a 1, you
I
automatically
think
fail.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. See.
Yeah, I think so.
But it's one of those where if I go to break out a game, I don't want to have to comb the rule book to remember if an auto 1 is a fail or not in this game. And it just drives me crazy, because like you say, in this case, it's mathematically, uh, good that they did it because the math works out. But that's fine. But I wish they would just do away with that and rebalance everything so that you didn't have to have that rule in there. Because I just can't handle it. I was like, oh yeah, 1s are a fail. Oh, okay, duh. And I hate that because if you play a game and you're like 30 minutes into a game and you succeeded on a couple of things because your modifiers were so great that it didn't matter what you rolled anyway, and then you go, oh, I should have failed, but then you're like, well, that stinks because I'm so beefed up in this one particular, ability or something that I still failed. I don't know. It's just dissatisfying for me. It's like a little crutch. I feel like it's a little bit of a crutch.
So you kind of feel like it's almost a design crutch. It's something that is there only to solve a problem. Am I
Not
understanding you correctly?
not necessarily in every single
Okay.
case. I don't necessarily think the designers intend it to be. They're like, ah, screw it, and then they throw up their hands and say, let's use the auto fail, auto succeed rule to fix this. I mean, I'm sure in some cases they do, but maybe in some cases it's kind of a thematic thing where it's just like, it's a catastrophe. And I know that kind of comes from probably from role playing and maybe some older war games too. But I know in role playing you kind of have that attitude of, sometimes just stuff happens, right? And
Right.
and
Right.
that's just how things go down, and you got to deal with it. And it's kind of part of the theme in that sense, you know. But um, but I think that's usually on a D20.
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah, you get a 1 on a D20
or 20
is
on a
a
20.
critical failure, and a
Yeah.
20 is a massive success, or something of that nature. Yeah.
So it's more
No,
special.
you're totally right.
It's more of a
Yes. Yeah.
special
No,
thing.
I
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, and maybe that is my role playing days. Maybe that's one of the things that gives me sort of a fondness for that game design kind of idea.
Yeah, but on a
That
D6.
I find it. Yeah, yeah, but on a D6, boy, yeah, you're right. It is. It can be much more intrusive.
Yeah.
It's not just that random. Oh my God, look, I just rolled a 20.
Oh, it's almost funny.
So
In an RPG, you roll a 1, everybody laughs around the table. Haha, look at you.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, we always had you broke your weapon, or
Yeah.
what something happened. You tripped over your own foot and fell, and it just at the worst possible time. You're a thief trying to climb a wall and you just fell off of it. So yeah, it's always kind of fun to imagine that. But in a game, well, while we're talking about dice, I'm going to kind of diverge. I just cut myself off in midstream, which is awkward, but whatever. While we're talking about dice, I want to talk about the only thing about the game that I'm not super fond of, which is, the sort of the dice-driven combat system. To me, I have found the combat to be unusually erratic in this game. Okay, when I think about the modifiers that I have available to me, because I'm a person, and I've been on record many times talking about this. I have horrible luck with dice. I'm not good with dice. They don't like me. I'm not really fond of them. But I've been very fond of the modern sort of Eurogame designs that build into the system's ways to mitigate the dice. Now, this is one of the things that I like about Nemo's work is you have those three tracks. You have the Nemo track, the crew track, and the hull track. And if you're willing to sort of, take a hit in one of those three areas, and sometimes you're not allowed to, but sometimes you can. Cards and whatnot will tell you what you're allowed to use to aid you in a test or an event. But the way this game works is very thematic and very interesting, but it leads me eventually to some frustrations. Like, for example, the first time that you expend a hull point, you are going to get +2 to your die roll. The first time that you expend your crew, you got a fresh crew, and it's going to be +3, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, the second time you ask the crew, come on, boys, let's do it, +3. And then it goes to +2. And then they're not really fresh. Now they're just fit, and it's +2. And now they're not so spiffy. It's +1. And eventually you flirt with one of the other things that can happen in the game, which is if you get too low on any of these tracks, you can sort of hit this critical area where you're actually going to be losing a considerable amount of victory points at the end of the game if you kind of cross that threshold or your marker is there or beyond. And so to me, listen, that's totally thematic. I get it.
Right.
Your ship is battered and almost destroyed. Your crew is exhausted and combat fatigued, and I totally get that. But what happens is it's an inverse kind of relationship. As the game ratchets up in difficulty, as you mentioned earlier with the ships, the way if you engage in combat, you gain notoriety, people are really going to start gunning for you. They're going to send bigger and badder ships out to hunt you down, right? As the difficulty of the game ratchets up, generally what has happened is you have exhausted or have begun to exhaust some of those resources. Now,
maybe, yeah.
The game does. Yeah, I'm sorry. What was that?
No, I say maybe. I mean, go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah. So the game does have mechanisms to help you. Like you can rest, and you can, refresh your crew. You can get those upgrades for your ship. But when you're talking about a game that basically is lasting 52 turns, okay, one calendar year.
Yeah.
Every time you do these things, it costs you a lot of time.
Yes.
And so I feel that pressure of time in this game. Now, that's a good thing because it makes me care.
Mm-hmm.
But I do see this sort of inverse relationship between the bonuses that I have available to use are going down while the difficulty is getting higher and higher. And so what has happened, Joel, is I've had a few plays of this where I just get my butt kicked because early on I had to kind of use some resources that I didn't really want to, but kind of felt I had to use. And then these other ships come out, and they're so much more powerful that I end up taking a beating from them, and I take damage from them, which lowers those tracks as well at times, depending on what kind of damage they do when they hit you. So I don't love the combat system in this game. I like that it's not a cakewalk. If it was too easy, it would be no fun. And I'm not saying it's too hard. Like, I've played the game quite a bit, and I'm still going to play it. I enjoy it. But if I had to pick one thing, for me personally, that kind of bothered me a little bit, it was the combat system. I felt it was kind of difficult. What are your thoughts about the combat system?
I don't mind it. I like that you have this sort of balance between time and how you use time to either rest or repair, your ship or your crew. And I like the kind of push your luck aspect of it because remember, if you're succeeding, then after you exert, they kind of go back to where they were. And so it's sort of a push your luck. It's like I'm going to use them. If we succeed, they're going to be so buoyed by the success that they're going to stay fresh and alive. Whereas if you fail, then they kind of get down on themselves, and then you got to spend a little bit of me time with the crew and kind of get them back on their feet,
Me time.
buy them drinks or whatever it is. But when you do
Nice.
that, you have to spend time to recover or repair or whatever. Um, I like that because unlike some solitaire games, the end can come in a variety of ways with Nemo's War. I mean, you have the whole thing of going through the one deck, and then you bring the what was it, the Maelstrom card. That can trigger it, or if you run out of time, then you run out of time and it's over. And I like that you have that whole tension of I really want to succeed. I want to apply all of these modifiers, but if you use that up early, then you're going to be out of luck. If things don't go your way, it's just going to be a catastrophe. And I find that for me, so overwhelmingly thematic for me that I really appreciate that because it's like, when you start like a project or something, for your job or some new venture in life, if you don't start off on the right foot, things aren't going to go very well. But if you prepare and do your thing, and then you start off good, and you're going to keep going good, and that's where I kind of come back to it. And I think I'm going to kind of agree with you because it's almost like you have a runaway. It's almost like a runaway leader. So if you start off good, you're probably going to keep doing good. And if you start off bad, you're probably going to keep doing bad. Now, I wouldn't say that's always the case. And I think I played a game only about 6 times before I got rid of it. So, but I did see, variety in how the games played out. I saw games where it was like a nightmare, a catastrophe. Other games where I really did really well. I never felt like I walked all over the game, and I never felt like the game completely walked all over me. There were times where I was pretty sure things were going to go bad, where I'd maybe kind of come back a little, but then I would go back to losing. And then other times where it kind of would go, either way. I thought I was doing okay, but then, it went south or vice versa. So I like that aspect of it. And I like the whole visual aspect of how you exert the guys because it's the 3 tracks with the little circle counters. And you just move that little circle just down sort of half a tick into a space on the board that isn't even really a space. And I don't know why that is. I think it's the coolest thing. And so, okay, I'm going to move this guy down. Now it's like in this limbo visually, on the board. And if it succeeds, I just push it right back at where it was. And if I fail, it just goes, okay, now it's dropped down. And so
Right.
I just like
It's the
that.
Schrodinger's cat counters. Yes.
Yes. Yes, exactly right.
Are they here? Are they there? You don't know until you look.
That's right.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I do really appreciate that about it as well. I like the tension. It's just, again, and that's why I wanted to ask you your opinion because for me, I just don't do well with dice. So I never know whether that's the game or whether that's me. And normally, how I tell that as a person who tries to help people by doing some reviews and talking about games is I look at the sort of totality of the experience of everybody at the table, right? So if it doesn't seem to be a problem for other people, well, that's just me. I'm like cursed with dice. My wife, the other night we were playing, oh, geez, what was the game? We were playing Dungeon Dice. And my wife was rolling these dice for the monster. And in Dungeon Dice, you roll these black dice, and they have different values on them. And I think the low is a 1 and the high is a 6. They're like standard 6-sided, right? She rolled quadruple 6s, like just boom, just one roll, all 6s. And I looked at her and she starts laughing at me and she's like, "You have to take me to Vegas." This is like a running joke in our household because she is incredibly lucky when it comes to dice. She's very fortunate with them. And I am the exact polar opposite. So that's why I wanted to ask you because, this is a solitaire game. I don't have the ability to kind of look around the table and see how other people are dealing. Is it really too harsh? Or is it just my sort of natural propensity to stink with die rolls? And so it sounds like you don't feel it's too harsh, which means it's probably just fine. And as a aspiring designer, I can also say it's incredibly hard to try to hit that sweet spot. Between what is too easy and what is too difficult, because if it's too easy, people are going to love your game the first 3 or 4 times they play it, and then they're going to say there's no challenge here. I've beaten it. I'm done. It's almost like a video game thing. I've beaten it. I'm done. If you make it too challenging, then people are going to say it's frustrating, it's too difficult, I get beaten up too often. I'm not having any fun. And so to try to find that sweet spot in game design is really, really difficult. And so, I'm glad that you shared those thoughts with me so that I can kind of gauge my own sort of reaction against that part of the game, that aspect of the game. Okay. So we agree that the game is oddly thematic for a game that is basically an abstracted map and a bunch of charts and tables. Where do you think that theme comes from? Is it the alternate victory conditions? Is it what? Do you think that's where it comes from?
No, I don't. Well, yes, I do. Um, I think that, hmm, it's because there are spaces on the board. I come back to the map, I think, because if you think about it, you have the Western Pacific, and on that space, you can have either treasure or you can have ships. And so you can interact with that space in different ways. You can go and dig up for the treasure, or you can go blow up the ships or try to. And you can treat the ships in different ways. You can get them for victory points and really sort of, I don't remember what that ship track is where you put them for victory points, but it's kind of like your log, your journal, or the historical uh, outline of your battles, your naval battles, and so you have all these things that you can kind of use in multiple ways. And even when you do tests on the different cards, and you have the events on the cards, you know they can have different outcomes. You can keep a card sometimes and hold it, and then use it later. And
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
yeah,
Yeah, you're right.
and then you can, if you keep them and score them, you can score them for science or the different things like that. So I think it's just the amount of variety, and to me, that's always felt like a thematic game. What a thematic game should always have sort of just variety, not necessarily be deep in strategy. I mean, that's not a hallmark of theme necessarily, but I think variety of outcomes so that you can get a better understanding of the subject is that's really what games will do better or should do better than like a movie or a book. Because if I play, um, well, this game, if I play the war side of Nemo, I kind of understand that aspect of his character, even though he's a fake person. But or if I'm trying to think of another game, you know, gosh, I know there's a game I was thinking just about this thing. Well, here, we talked about Andy and the Abyss before on your show, and uh, if you play one of the four different factions, they operate very differently, and so you start to kind of understand a little bit about, um, their concerns and their drawbacks, and their abilities and the things that they're good at, and so it gives you more of an understanding. But it's not just a one-time thing. You sit down and play it once. You come back to it and play it again and again and again, and you start to learn more about what the complexities were in the gray areas, because things are never black and white. And to me, that's what this kind of does so well is I can have those different outcomes, and that kind of gets back to the different sort of paths to victory. And I really enjoy the little paragraphs at the end, because I believe
Yes,
there's
yes,
like,
so do I. Yeah,
what is there, like three or
yeah,
four paragraphs for each of the victories. So it
yes,
kind of says like, oh, Nemo was just this feared, terror on the seas, or he liberated all these people, or he found a cure to these diseases, or nobody ever heard of this guy. If you fail, and he's this big
right,
nobody, he's
right,
a loser. Like really, you feel like such a loser. Like I don't, nobody even knows who you are. Quit reading. Try again.
right, right, right,
And
right.
so it just has that complexity of outcomes, you know, um, and that's one thing that I think is you get into a game like Eldritch Horror is a good one, for example, where you have, and that's one that took me a few times to play and really appreciate, because the first time I played it was very random. The second time it was a little bit better, and then I've been playing it more since. I initially reviewed it and all that stuff, and I keep coming back to it. And yes, it's just kind of like a flop a card, read the flavor text thing. At its heart, that's really what that game is. But I think because you get familiar with pieces of this world and you realize some of the different things that can happen, it's not like the game presents to you a cohesive narrative arc, because Eldritch Horror certainly does not. This one
Right.
does a better job of that, I think, for sure. But just to elucidate sort of the diamond of all the possibilities of all these alternate universes that are going on inside this box, it's like as you play through these different events and go through different cards, that each game kind of informs the next. And instead of one narrative story, it's like this huge narrative story that goes across multiple game sessions. And that's one thing that I've really enjoyed about Eldritch Horror especially. But I think with this as well, this one actually has a strong linear narrative arc though within a game session. Yeah, and so I think that that's one thing that this does, maybe better than Eldritch Horror, is Eldritch Horror does not have that, and that you could play Eldritch Horror Solitaire, but you could play this one co-op as well. But they have that in common, where as you revisit the game, you're going to learn more about the characters and the different possibilities. But this one actually has both. It has a strong arc, and it has sort of that, when I come back to it, I go, oh, I've investigated this new thing about the world. Oh, that's interesting. It just, it has that aspect of it. And I think that's where the theme is. And it is those 4 victory conditions, but I think it's a lot of that sort of how I can reuse each of these different areas and the different components and learn something new about them every time I come back to it.
Yeah, that's really
To a certain extent. I'm sure that drops off a wall, off a cliff. It's not infinitely emergent.
No, but I think you make a
Anyway.
good point. You kind of blew my mind there a little bit, which is with games like this, whether it's something like Cuba Libre or Arkham Horror, you really are kind of participating in telling the story. You are kind of getting to see the story told from its multiple points of view. I mean, the only literary example I can think of is The Sound and the Fury, right? Which is Faulkner writing the same story 3 different times from 3 different characters' points of view. And that kind of stuck with me when you said that, because you're thinking about Nemo, and you use that analogy where you're like, well, I learned something about that part of Nemo's personality by playing the game for that goal, and it sort of informs you more about that fictional character, in the same way that playing some of the coin series can inform you a little bit about some of the real life kind of situations and things that those games are meant to represent. And that's a really fascinating idea.
Mm-hmm.
That this notion that I don't want to say, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. That's not where I'm going with this. But the notion that one is sort of packaged for you and delivered to you. Now, you can interpret it in many different ways. You can read a novel and you might draw something out of that novel that's going to be slightly different from what I drew out of it. But you're still looking at the same characters, the same events, the same sort of arc, the same plot, the same resolution, all of those kinds of things, right? But in a board game, especially a sort of a thematic board game like this, even though this is just a bunch of charts and tables, like you said, there's a lot of theme here.
Mm-hmm.
You really do kind of get to see this story. It's almost like someone made a movie and then they made the same movie but from a different point of view, or it's almost that sort of alternate timeline kind of feel a little bit, where this is what it would have been like if Nemo had done this, and this is what it would have been like, and this is how it might have played out if Nemo had done that. And so that's a really compelling kind of a thing. It's a very strong pull, because you are, in these instances that you're describing, Joel, you as the player are the co-author of the story. Whereas in traditional media, like, and I'm bringing this all up because you and I talked about media. In traditional media like books and movies,
Yeah.
you are generally a more passive. I'm not going to say you're completely passive,
Right.
because everybody brings something different to the table, but you're more of a passive recipient and not so much an active part in telling the story. And maybe that's one of the reasons why you hear people waxing on and on about thematic games, and I think about the
Right.
the game War of the Ring. Every time I play that, I'm imagining Tolkien's work, and I know Tolkien's work, and I know how it happened. I know what the deal was, but when I play it, things go different. And so I have this kind of like, ooh, what if that had happened? Or, oh,
Hmm.
what if this had been done? And then you get to actually see that novel that played out in front of your mind. Really interesting. So thanks for sharing that perspective, because it kind of took me aback a little bit. And that's why I kind of jumped in there for a second. So I apologize for that. But I just want to kind of try to articulate that. I don't know if
Right.
I'm really capturing the spirit of what you're saying, but that's where my mind's going with it.
No, yeah, I think we're on the same page there. I would say I have not read the Songs of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones. I've
Yes.
just watched the show, but my understanding is that he writes that from each chapter is a different character's perspective. And so you may see an event that happens through, I don't know, Ned Stark's perspective, and then the next chapter will be, through the perspective of Tywin Lannister or somebody else, from the show or from the books. So that's kind of an interesting way of maybe like, oh, this is kind of like I played Nemo's War today, and we did the war aspect, and that was from the point of view of the British government, and then I played the other day, and it was science, and that's from Nemo's point of view because he's actually a wholesome, good character in his own head,
Right, right,
Um,
right.
so yeah, I think there's a little bit to that as well.
Right, right. Yeah, it's really and I think the designers of Nemo's War did a really good job in trying to shape that narrative. While you were talking,
Yeah.
I went and pulled out my copy finally, which I probably should have had in front of me the whole time. And I was looking at that chart. It's called the Nemo's War Epilogue Outcome. So you basically, when you're done, you kind of count up your victory points, and you're going to find out whether you scored a triumph or a success or inconsequential or a failure or an utter failure, right?
Hmm.
And then they give you these nice little paragraphs. So, for example, war, if you score success, it says many ships are lost at sea to mysterious circumstances. The
Right.
Imperial Navy spend years hunting the cause of these sunken ships. Rumors, never confirmed, of a metal-hulled monster cause the economic costs of shipping to soar. Eventually, ships must be organized into giant convoys to protect themselves. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you get
Yeah.
the idea here. That's what you're talking about. Like, when you're done playing the game, you're like, haha, that was me. I did that.
Right.
Yes, I'm the terror of the sea, and I'm this mysterious metal clad. And then, if you fail, it's like the Nautilus is destroyed by naval forces, and the world never learns about Captain Nemo. His legacy is lost forever beneath the waves, And
Yeah.
I appreciate
Right.
that effort to say, instead of just saying you lose, you suck,
Right.
they still try to tell you the story. They're like, and I love that last line, his legacy is lost forever beneath the waves. Now it's not high poetry, but it's
Right.
pretty good. I mean, that's some good writing. Somebody put some thought
Right.
into that, so that when you're done, even though you didn't do well, you're kind of like, all right, that's the end of that story. Yeah, that stinks.
Hmm. Hmm.
But you get something out of it, and so I really appreciate that. That's one of the other things about the design. So thanks for bringing that up again, because I'd kind of forgotten about that little chart. I kind of eventually got caught up in the math of it and just trying to beat my score, when I
Sure.
was actually missing. I'd say the last 2-3 times I didn't really look at the chart, and now that I've read it again, I regret that, because that's a nice close. We call that a kind of a close. It's almost like an epilogue to the book,
Right.
to that movie that you've been seeing in your head.
Well, you can also kind of play it as, okay, I got this score. Now I get to read this to myself. It's like, ooh, I get to read this, and you kind of just take a moment, read it, and then you kind of invest a little bit of your imagination into that. And then even the failure, it's not like, dag nabbit, you flipped the table, you lost.
Right.
You get to read this sad little story, and it's like, oh, cool. At least I got taken to this spot. It brought me emotionally to this
Right.
feeling of being completely ineffectual. Thanks. Um, but to me, that's better than just like, oh, I lost the game. You
Yes,
know.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's another nice touch in the game, because so many games when you play them solitaire, you're doing exactly what I just described. You end up consulting sort of a table, or you say play at solitaire and see if you can beat your own best score, and it's like, it's not really inspiring.
Right. Like you play Agricola and you're like, cool, I beat 50 points. And now what?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like, okay, I have a diverse farm. I always have a diverse farm when I'm done playing Agricola. I just maybe had some better cards to start this time.
Right.
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You've hit it right on the head there. This notion of just trying to play to beat yourself is, for me personally, it's only me. I'm not speaking for anybody else, but to me, that's not very satisfying.
Hmm.
Whereas this, like you said, even when you screw up, or you fail, you still kind of get that payoff at the end.
Right.
You get to kind of see that and bring that to a close so that you feel like, all right, didn't go my way, but it was still an experience. And that's a really impressive thing to pull off with a cardboard paper map and
Mhm.
some fairly thin, little counters with some art and some numbers on them. So,
Well, even
um,
like, thinking about it a little bit more, I mean, even uh, great games like Robinson Crusoe and to a lesser extent War of the Ring, they have this whole thing of like on off, win lose, yes no at the end of the day. Where
right.
this there's degrees of winning and losing, you
Hmm.
know. And I think that's important. It's not only is it different paths of victory, it's like how much did you win, how much did you lose. And Victory Point Games does that in a lot of their games, the States of Siege games.
Right.
I think this one maybe they explored a little bit more. A lot of the games, like the States of Siege, they have this. Okay, so at the end of the game, you had how many victory points, and then this is tell you if it was a really good, amazing success or
Right.
victory
Or
or
Pyrrhic victory, or yep.
yeah, Pyrrhic victory, and so that's interesting as well. So I like that there's a degree. It's not necessarily black and white. Um, and I think that eases a little bit of the frustration of the end of the game. Regardless, if you because even sometimes if you win, it's not satisfying. So,
Right,
um,
right.
so I think that helps.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked a good deal about this game. We've talked about the things that we like, the thematic elements of the game, the decision points in the game are very, at least in my opinion, there's a lot of good decision points to make in this game,
Mhm.
which makes it very compelling. We've talked about the sort of narrative aspects of the game. The things we didn't like, you're not a big fan at all of the art direction in this game, and I can understand why. I mean, that's part of your gig, it's part of your background, and so you're very sensitive to that and much more aware of that. For me, not as much of a big deal, but I clearly recognize I'm not looking at a Michael Menzel board.
Mm.
I'm not looking at, this beautiful thing laid before me. Now, that being said, we're going to be able to tease people a little bit with some, hopefully, some inside information about the upcoming second edition of Nemo's War. I was hoping to be able to do it as we record this tonight. We're recording this on June 3rd with Alan. From Victory Point Games, who is going to come on and talk with us and tell us a little bit about the future of this game and maybe get a little bit more specifics. But sadly, our schedules aren't syncing.
Mm.
So I'm going to have to do that post-production. But I'll have the opportunity to speak with him and hear about maybe some of the things that are going to be features of the second edition of the game. I know for a fact, from what he told me before as we communicated through emails, that, we are going to get sort of the full treatment. There will be a sort of mounted, that kind of puzzle style board that they've
Right.
been doing recently, full color and all that with new art. I know they have an in-house art kind of and graphic design person that they use, which is nice because you're starting to see some a consistent sort of Victory Point look, which is nice. And based on what I'm seeing of these second editions of the games, they do seem to be really nice upgrades from the first edition. Another game of theirs that I had the chance to play recently was the second edition of I Say Homes, which is
Hmm.
just infinitely better than the art and the components, of course, in the first edition. So I think we're going to be pleased to see some new things coming down the pike, and I'm looking forward to talking to him. And we'll kind of put that into the episode towards the end for people who are listening. So you'll have a chance to hear directly from him what's coming down the pipe. So looking forward to that as well.
Well, make
Well,
sure you get
Joel,
an ETA out of him.
I will. I will do my best to get him to tell us. But
I did,
uh,
Jeff. I did want to make one more point about this game. I didn't want to lose sight of it,
absolutely,
if you
yeah.
don't mind.
No, no, sure.
We talked about earlier about how it's derived from a piece of fiction,
Hmm.
and War of the Ring was actually one I totally forgot about. That's an amazing representation of a piece of fiction, and also Robinson Crusoe and Friday and all that stuff. The cool thing about this one is it's almost like it's fiction, but it's also historical in a
Hmm.
slight way because it's about the imperialist period, and it's kind of about when the world was still a little bit of a mystery to folks. Now we've circumnavigated the globe a billion times. There's the internet, all this stuff, and so I really liked that. And this really almost has nothing to do with the game itself, but it didn't hide it from me, which is a good thing. So it feel like I'm almost playing a historical game, but it's through the eyes of fiction.
Hmm.
And I think that is something that we haven't really seen a whole lot of either. I mean, Robinson Crusoe is, yes, there's somebody crashed on an island, but that could be modern, that could be 300 years ago.
Right.
War of the Ring obviously is pure fantasy. And, if you play, I don't know, the Game of Thrones board game, that's obviously pure fantasy. But I think it would be interesting for any designers that may be listening to you. Uh, it would be interesting to go and look at some of these works that are public domain, outside of Cthulhu,
Yeah.
and get look at some of these that are historical on one side, but also there's a bit of fiction. Sherlock Holmes. There's a little bit of history in there. It's grounded in some kind of reality.
Yes.
So anyway, I just want to make that point. I thought that was something it hits me in a sentimental point where you can kind of get into that what if scenario. Like, what it, just a silly example. We play Sail to India today at work. A friend of mine is Indian, and then, another friend of mine that I was playing with is American. And, I found India, and I'm like, I found it to my Indian friend, and I found it before you, and you're from there. You should have been there already. What was your problem? So anyway,
Nice.
that's a silly example,
Nice.
but um, but yeah, I think that'd be an interesting way of like maybe re-exploring a historical event or time period, but through the eyes of fiction. Uh, I thought that was
That's
neat.
a that's
Anyway,
a really interesting idea. I like that idea quite a bit because there is quite a lot of historical fiction that's out there.
yeah,
There's many books and novels that have been written that are that sort of it's totally made up and yet it's grounded in real events in history. Now I don't know that but there's a fine line here, Joel. Like for
right,
example, The Pillars of the Earth
right,
was a novel by Ken Follett, okay?
hmm,
And that is a piece of historical fiction. It is about a real place, a real cathedral. But the main characters are sort of made up. They're mostly fictionalized. You have lists of some names from people who lived back then and people who were working on this cathedral and whatnot. But I don't know for a fact. I'm just blindly throwing a number out here, but I would guess 75% of it was completely fictionalized and made up.
right,
Um, and so there's this great story to be told there about the sort of politics of the intrigue of the church and the influence and the power of the church at that time and builders and tradespeople and all of these kind of really interesting things. But that game
hmm,
turned into a classic Euro.
right,
I don't
exactly,
feel that history at all. I'm playing a Euro game, and
hmm,
it's a really nice Euro game, and I like it, but it's nowhere near what we're talking about. So, maybe there's that sort of that line between sort of a themed Euro and a actual thematic game.
right. Well, I
And I
mean,
think what
even
you're
like,
talking about
yeah,
is an actual thematic game. Yeah.
exactly. Well, I think that's the thing is you want to hang your hat on the characters in the fiction. I mean, Kalis is a real place, you
Right.
know,
Right.
but and I'm sure they built a cathedral there or a castle there, You know, but there's no characters in it. You know, in Nemo's War, there's Nemo. You've got the crew and the different characters there. Um, but that's what sets it apart to me. Carcassonne is a real place. But there's no characters in that game. I mean,
Right.
like a lot of games of historical fiction. I mean, you can take any war game or Kalis or Ticket to Ride is historical fiction. I mean, if you really wanted to stretch it, oh, Bora Bora could be historical fiction, right? It's about the island of Bora Bora, right?
Right.
But there's no character you can point to and say that is Billy or that is Nemo or that is Jim. You know,
Right.
that's what I really like about this is it's derived from the fiction, and then it just happens to take place in this time period, and
Right. Right.
you get a little bit better sense of a myriad of things going on as well. So like Pillars of the Earth and Kalis are very one dimensional. They could be what you might call, I don't know, the science victory in Nemo's War. This is where we're building a castle.
Right.
Well, what about all the other stuff that was going on? So and when you add those layers, then it becomes more fleshed out and feels more realistic, and it feels a little bit more of a better story. Anyway,
Excellent.
yeah,
Excellent. Well, I just wanted to push you on that point a little bit, and I'm
hmm
glad that you brought it
absolutely,
up, just because I think you've got the germ of an idea there that is a very interesting one when you think about game design. This notion of maybe looking to literature, but focusing on the character, because everything you just said rings true. And it goes right back to the earlier example you used, which was Sherlock Holmes. I think about, the game Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. That game works perfectly. It's open-ended. You're trying to solve cases. You're totally immersed in that world. You're going after trying to solve a case, but at the same time there's a secondary case that pops up in every single one. And so you can go down blind alleys and chase some red herrings, and it all feels everything from the map of London to the directory to the newspapers that you're poring over trying to find clues that will give you some suggestions or ideas for where to go with your investigation. See, that all works. And you are basically kind of playing as if you are one of his oh gosh, my memory has totally failed me. The kids in the neighborhood that used to work for him. I'm trying to remember what they were called. Darn it, darn it, darn it. He had a group of kids that he would send out to do some scouting for him or some basic investigation. The Baker Street Irregulars. Okay, there we go. There's like this group that he would send out and go and kind of help him out. And that was drawn directly from the stories, directly from the literature source itself. So I agree with you. I think that's a really fascinating idea and something that would be very worthwhile for people to explore. So thanks for sharing that. Well, do you have any other final kind of thoughts or ideas about Nemo's War, or you think we've pretty much reached the end of this particular tale?
I think we've reached the end, Jeff.
Okay. Well, I agree. I'm going to give this game a rather big thumbs up. I really enjoy this game. I can't wait for the improved components because I am a little bit of a game snob, I admit it. But I totally also agree with you, which is out of all the early bagged Victory Point games that I've played, this is the one that I've been most pleased with as far as, the actual components and the gameplay and all of that. It really works well. So, with this second edition coming, I imagine there's probably going to be opportunities to score a first edition. And I think it would definitely be worth trying to pick one up and give it a whirl. And then, maybe upgrade yourself to the second edition when that one comes out. So hopefully we'll find out more about that from the president of Victory Point Games later in the show. And now it's time for a new game review. Join us for a quick look here on The Long View. So now on a quick look, we're going to take a look together, Joel and I, at a very surprising little game. This is a game called Star Realms. This game came out, as far as I know, just a few months ago. And it was a game that I picked up on a whim. I remember hearing something about it. I believe it was a Kickstarter game. And I didn't really pay it a whole lot of mind. But then I was doing some online shopping and I saw that, oh, look, here's this little game, Star Realms. I seem to remember hearing about that. And it was like dirt cheap. It was like $12. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can totally do that. And then I saw it's a complete game in this little box for 2 players. And I thought, well, maybe my kids would enjoy this one too. You know what? I'm going to get 2 boxes of it so that I got enough for 4 players. So I threw it into an order and really thought nothing more about it. And then eventually I got it and popped open the box and checked out the cards and started to play this little game. It's all comes in a tuck box, a large tuck box, about the size of a deck box that you might use for Magic the Gathering or Pokemon or something, right? And a little rule sheet that's folded and stuck in there. And that's really all that there is just cards in this rule sheet. But once I started playing this game, I really was taken with it. It is a deck building game, but it's got some nice little twists on it. It's almost like an Ascension style game. You have a central row of cards that you can draft. The cards kind of come in these different factions, very much like Ascension, where you have like Lifebound and Mechana and all these different things. You have the same kind of feel here, which is with a space theme. And so you might initially think, as I did, it's like, it's Ascension in space, whatever. All right, it's only like $12. Who cares? It'll be fun. My son will like it. But then there were some subtle differences that I really began to appreciate, and we can explore that in just a moment. But Joel, can you tell me how you first heard about Star Realms, and what it was that prompted you to grab yourself a copy, and what your first experience was?
Well, I was a Kickstarter backer.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I demoed Ascension for Gary Games, now Stoneblade Entertainment, at Gen Con 3 years ago or 4 years ago.
Wow.
Well, yeah. And Rob Doherty was one of the, I guess you call him a developer of Ascension. I don't know that he's been given design credit, but he was heavily involved with them. And he's designed a couple of other games, Battle for Hill 218, and what's that little card game, Battlefronts? Gosh, what is it called? Oh, it's failing me. I've never played it. But it's like a miniatures game, but instead of miniatures, it's cards, and you move around, and it's, you measure distance and stuff.
Okay.
Battlefront Fantasy Warfare, something like that. Sorry. So he designed a few games, and so I got to meet him, a little bit during that convention, and and the guys there. And then I noticed, last year he was coming out with this game, and I kind of follow everything that they do, just because I'm a huge Ascension nut, and also a fan of Soul Forge, which is nothing to do with Star Realms, but Stoneblader Entertainment also makes that. And so I looked at it, and he had a little bit of a demo, and I believe he did a video with Eric Martin from BTG. At Gen Con last year, and I believe the Kickstarter launched shortly after Gen Con, or maybe a couple of months after Gen Con. It was a
Okay.
very quick turnaround. I believe the Kickstarter ran in September of October, and I had my copies of the game, I backed 2 copies, by the end of December. I got them after Christmas, but right before New Year's. And I played it a few times and loved it right out of the bat. And and I was a Kickstarter backer, so I got some of the extras, which I think you can get now from the Board Game Geek promo store.
Okay.
At least some of them. And if you can, I will actually check while we're talking here. If you can get them, I would definitely recommend them. Let's see what promos they have, because I know they have some promos. And some of them are sort of like starting special abilities that
Oh, interesting. Okay.
that you can get here. Okay, so you can get what they're called gambits, and so they're little cards that you can give to each player. You can either shuffle them up or give them randomly, or draft them and give people multiple copies if you want. So everybody maybe gets 2 of these. And it
Okay.
just gives you a little starting power. Like one guy may have one that you can trash and gain 8 life. You do that once in the game. Another one may give you +1 combat every single turn. There's a whole variety of these things. And so if you get the promo set, you can get that, and you can also get some of the uh, special card and also the co-op and solo challenge for the Pirates of the Dark Star. So it looks
Oh,
like the
nice.
only thing
Okay.
that folks would be missing if they went and bought this at the store and then got the promo set would be there's another solo and co-op challenge, and it's like this big blobby mutant thing. Um,
Okay.
but big deal. The just to iterate, the solo and the co-op is probably the weakest part of the game. So I don't you're not really missing a whole ton there. But I
Okay.
would totally go get the promo set for the Gambits. That's a really cool part of the game.
All
So anyway,
right.
that's long story short. I was a Kickstarter backer.
Well, thanks for the tip on that because I wasn't aware about those gambits. So
Hmm.
that sounds like that could be something that would be really interesting, and it goes, right back to what Tom Lehman was talking with me about, which is, you can accelerate the decision points of a game and the enjoyment of a game by kind of giving people sort of something from the get-go, some sort of an ability, some sort of a starting resources, some sort of something that's different that can get people really involved immediately in the game.
Hmm.
And that sounds like a really interesting idea. So I'll definitely be all over that. So hopefully there'll still be some there when I go to take a peek and when others go. So
Well, you can
one of
also
the
go to Amazon as well, and I believe they have a little promo thing you can get it from them as well. And I
oh, excellent.
believe that
Okay.
that one must have the other um, solo co-op challenge. So there may be two sets that folks need to get. But
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Well, Joel, the thing about this game that I really was sort of taken by that I liked was there's a couple of things that really kind of stuck out to me. Like Ascension, we have a very sort of simple kind of engine to the game. You have a
yes.
flop of cards in the middle, and you have a currency that you use to buy those cards. Those cards go into your discard pile. You shuffle up when you run out of your draw pile. It's like every other deck builder out there. Now, I know that sounds bad, but I like the fact that it's similar in that way and that there's no real overhead here. There's nothing revolutionary that I have to sort of learn. But the thing that is different about it that I do like is I love the sort of card combinations and how they build off each other. Now, this is
Hmm.
reminiscent of Ascension, but to me, it's almost bumping it up even almost like another level. And the way that is because every card that you play out of your hand, there's no cost to play the card. You just slap it down on the table because you paid the cost when you acquired the card.
Hmm.
And when you play a card, the card is going to give you some sort of ability. It's either going to give you currency or it's going to give you firepower. And then that's kind of shown on this little banner on the bottom of the card. But then there's a secondary banner. And the secondary banner is going to tell you about a secondary effect that is going to activate and kick in if you have played cards from the same faction in that turn. So these bonuses start to stack upon each other. So, to give you an example, in the early part of the game, for people who are out there listening, you might be able to do like 2 damage to your opponent. And this is a game that kind of reminds me a little bit of Magic in that you basically have you start with a total, a number of, I don't want to call them life points. What do they call them, Joel? What's it called again?
Authority.
Authority. Okay, so and that of course makes you think about Eric Cartman saying "respect my authority." But anyway, you start with authority, and if you can get somebody's authority down to 0, then they've lost and you've won. If you're playing a 2-player duel kind of a game, okay,
Hmm.
and so that's pretty straightforward. That's pretty normal. So in the start of the game, you might do someone 2 damage or 3 damage. Well, I've played games where I have this sort of blob armada. And the blob cards are very interesting as a faction because they're incredibly cheap most of the time, but they're incredibly violent. These blobs are really, really violent. And I've had turns where I hit somebody for like 13, 14 in one shot, in one hand. And so,
Oh yeah.
the game escalates. It has this nice ramp up as you play the game, as you get more and more powerful, especially if you're able to sort of specialize. And, I really feel that very strongly in the same way that in Ascension, I feel it very strongly with Lifebound. They kind of work really well, they stack really well with each other. And, you end up with this kind of monster turn that you do these amazing things. That's the first thing I like about it. The second thing that I really enjoy about it is the idea of the stations. So the game is not just about putting out ships and blowing each other up. There's also station cards, and I absolutely, Joel, we were talking about graphic design in Nemo's War. The simple fact that station cards are in what you would call a landscape orientation and the ship cards are in a portrait orientation is just such a simple thing, but
Hmm.
it's so amazingly useful.
Yeah.
So when I look at my hand, I instantly know these are station cards, these are ship cards. I don't have to think about it. I can visually see it at a glance. I absolutely love that. And so you put these station cards down in front of you, and they're going to do something for you every turn. They're permanently there unless your opponent blows them up.
Right.
And then you also have this really nifty notion that they put in this game of outposts. And again, very graphically easy to understand.
Hmm.
The defense of a station, or any card for that matter, is represented by a shield, very standard iconography. I would love to someday just do an episode talking with someone about this language, this weird emergent language of iconography in board games that we all have kind of come to know and understand. So you have this shield, which you kind of naturally think defense, shield. If the shield is black, it's an outpost. If it's black with a white number, it's an outpost. If it's the standard kind of, I think it's like a grayish kind of a color, it's just a regular outpost, or I'm sorry, a regular station.
Hmm.
Outposts are cool because they're like your blockers in Magic the Gathering. They're like your meat shields. You throw an outpost out there, and your opponent can't hit any of your authority until they've gotten rid of your outposts. And so I find that to be a really interesting part of the game, and I'm looking for those outposts. And the other thing I love is that when your outposts are destroyed by your opponent, they go into your discard pile, and they'll come back again, kind of like constructs in Ascension. A lot of times you might be forced to discard a construct, but it's not destroyed. Well, in this game, if a station gets blown up, guess what? Someone's going to rebuild it eventually, and it's going to come back. And that station or that outpost is going to help you again in the future if you cycle through your deck again. So I like that part of it. And then finally, I really enjoy the trashing kind of option that you have. There is an ability that you have on a lot of your cards where if you're willing to discard it out of the game and
Yeah.
trash it, you get yet another bonus.
Yeah.
So those are the things that I kind of really appreciate about it. What are the things that you find particularly work for you, or are there any things that don't work for you about this game?
Hmm. Well, all of that really works for me. Like you're saying, you have a little bit of decision there with the trashing. Sometimes a station will have a trash on it. So you may even have an outpost that's been blocking for you, but you can trash it and generate a bunch of extra cash so you can buy,
Hmm.
the big Beefcake 8 cost card that just came out and get that into your deck and, start wrecking people with that. Um, I would say the thing about it is all of that is really cool. Everything you said, I 100% agree with. And just to kind of have a nitpick at it, is the two-player game can be pretty swingy. I mean, you can have a game where not very many outposts come out, and maybe one player is the one that grabs them,
Hmm.
and they just go in and wreck the junk out of the other person, and that's it. That's all she wrote.
Yep, yep.
But
I would agree.
those games are usually over in 10 minutes, you know. So it's not a huge deal, and it's definitely not every game. Um, there's some subtlety to which cards to buy, but I usually try to stick with like two colors, Like I like to get blue because blue's got a lot of life gain, and then like blue and something else because usually the other ones have a bunch of attack. And
Right,
I like how if you buy a bunch of blue and the blue will chain off each other, so I could be gaining like 8 life on one turn, or
right.
tack up a ton of damage. I mean, I've seen people do like 30 damage in a turn. Um,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, so it's really cool that way. And I would definitely say I really like adding the gambits to the game. I got to recommend it to folks because that gives you sort of your get out of jail free card. It gives you a little bit of a tack to your strategy, out the gate. It
Hmm.
just kind of mixes things up just enough to make it more interesting, I think. Um, the other things I like about the game are, it's like Ascension, where you open the box up, you flop the draw deck down, and give everybody their starting hand and go. There's no
Yep.
setup at all. It's almost like it just sets itself up.
Hmm.
And so it's got that kind of thing going for it, which really shouldn't be a compliment one way or the other because it's really got nothing to do with the gameplay, but it's nice because the game is satisfying enough that, if you whip it out, play it in 10 minutes, and somebody loses, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
Um, the other thing I like about it is the raid mode. I don't know if you've tried the raid mode,
No, I
but
haven't. Uh-uh.
that to me is my favorite way to play the game because what that is one player kind of takes on the role of the boss and they get some extra authority
Hmm.
and they get a bigger hand size. And all the other players just attack that person.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
right. And so, I don't remember what the breakdown is, but it depends on the number of players. So if it's just me against you two, I don't have the rules in front of me, but I think my starting life or my starting authority is the same, but I get an 8 card hand.
Right.
And the boss always goes first. And usually the first player only draws 3 cards on their first turn.
Hmm.
And then after that, everybody draws up to 5.
Right.
And that's a rule you don't want to miss. Because actually, the first 2 times I think I played it, I played that where everybody just drew to 5 cards. This is one of those rules you just kind of assume exists. And I
Right.
was like,
Right.
man, the first player is just like always winning. And I thought to myself, I'm like, maybe because it's an attacking game, it's whoever gets the attack first is going to win. And then
Right.
I went back and read the rules, and I was like, holy cow, you only get 3 cards to start.
Right.
So that's a rule
Right.
you don't want to forget.
Yeah, I
But
missed that one too.
yeah, but back to the boss. So they start every game. So they're at a disadvantage, obviously, because there's more players, and they start at 5 cards.
Hmm.
And then after that, they drop to like 8 or 9 or 7 or whatever the cards is based on the number of players. And so it's kind of cool because the boss has like a lot of money usually, and so they can buy the baddest cards out.
Hmm.
Whereas other players, they got to do a little bit of tech to get their engine going, grabbing those. I want to call them mystics, but they're not
Right.
mystics. It's like the version of mystics
Yeah,
and
like the scout ships. Yeah. Yeah.
scout ships. That's right, because it's like a mystic and a heavy infantry combined. If you played Ascension,
Right.
um, so other players got to kind of rely on getting those to get some extra money, or grabbing some of the money cards in the middle of the yellow cards, and the boss doesn't have to worry about that. So it's really fun to try to take out the boss, and I just like that asymmetrical aspect to it. One guy's super beefed up, and then the other people are just trying to work together to get them. But it feels pretty balanced.
Well, I'll have to definitely try that out. That sounds like that would be quite a lot of fun. So,
Hmm.
it sounds like, from you and from me, there's definitely a thumbs up on this game.
Yeah.
I really enjoy it. It's quick, it's easy, it's super portable. And I also want to say, I enjoy the art on the cards. And I really do enjoy the card quality. I think that the card stock is nice.
Hmm.
It is, it is really a high quality card, and they shuffle really easily. Very glossy. Sometimes I find a very small nitpick. My only nitpick about this game is the authority cards. I understand why they did what they did. The authority cards are double sided. So on the back of the ones are the fives, and on the back of the tens are the 20s.
Hmm.
And so sometimes it can be a little bit wonky if you forget that the orientation of the card is super important. Sometimes you're kind of tempted to, just grab your cards or something and slap them down and flip them over, and you can't do that with those authority cards. You have to be very careful that you keep them facing in the right direction, that you're only looking at the tops of them, and things that you don't pick them up and look at them and splay them and then put them down, because you put them down the wrong way, now you've reversed them. And so that's the one thing that I wish that those cards were actually single-sided rather than double-sided. But I'm assuming that was probably a cost kind of a choice, where it's like, okay, we can have these double-sided, and that's going to be useful, and that they're going to be very easy to distinguish from the rest of the deck, which is nice. But it's also going to save us, some cards. I know I've talked with publishers, and there's certain numbers of cards that kind of are standard in sheets, and if you go beyond that, well, then you're going to have a lot of waste. And so I don't know that that's the case. I'm just guessing,
I
but
disagree. I have actually read a lot of folks hate on those cards, and
right.
folks that I played it with like didn't fully, it was wonky, as you say. But
Uh-huh.
I found them very intuitive, because what I do is I set the piles, because you got what, 5 and 1 and 10 and 20.
Yeah, 1,
Uh,
5, 10, 20. Yep.
yeah, so I make separate, and it's because I have two decks, so I usually have extra
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of extra. So I just make separate piles, and I make a pile of 1s and 5s and flip them over. Well, the cool thing is if I take 4 damage, well, I just turn my 5 over to a 1.
Right.
And what I do is everybody stacks there, so I just put some 20s at the bottom, and then I think I don't remember. So I put a 20, and then I flip one over to a 10, and then a 5, and a bunch of 1s, and so it goes from lower to higher. So as
Right.
I'm sort of going down, it's very easy. I don't know, it really clicked with me with being able to, okay, flip this over, grab a 1, so I can make
Mm-hmm.
change, and then as I get over, then I get to the 10, I flip that over, that's a 5, and I either grab another 5, or grab
Right.
just a couple of 1s. So it just became this really slick way for me to, you can see the authority to deplete.
Right.
Now,
Right.
I think that's just because I played it a lot and I got into it, and I just kind of made it work for myself. It was wonky when I first did it, and I've seen
Mm-hmm.
other people are just like, whatever, just break out the pen and paper. Um,
Right. Right.
but I actually think it's pretty slick. I think folks should try to give that a chance and maybe kind of train their brain to work. Because once I got it going, it was like super quick, like almost instant.
Yeah.
And but I see a lot of people have that problem.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I don't know that it's necessarily a problem. It's just something that I have seen people flip those cards inadvertently, and that can really mess things up. So it's
Yeah.
more of a cautionary tale than a
Mhm.
problem.
Mhm.
The only other thing that I have a little bit of an issue with is the rules. There are some rules, kind of omissions and things that I wish were explained a little bit better. Like a classic example I can think of is, they talk about, well, if you're going to play with 4 players, just, bust out 2 decks.
Right.
It's like, cool. All right. But now I have this one massive deck.
Yeah.
And if I want to go back to playing 2-player, what does that mean? Like, what do I need to separate the decks again? Do I need to, and if so, where's the card manifest? Like, how do I know how many cards are supposed to be in each deck of each type? And oh, wait a minute, now I have this massive stack of cards, and I'm not really sure how to divide them up. And that's something that, maybe I'm making too big of a deal out of that, but I found that to be kind of annoying. It's like, okay, I really had the feeling that once I combined these decks, I was going to kind of be done. Because for me to sit there and try to figure out how many cards of each type there are, sort them all, then divide by the 2, and then
Yeah.
put them back in, and then shuffle them all up well again for each of it, that was going to be a pain in the butt. I don't know if there's a solution for that. I don't know if I just missed something, but I don't recall seeing anything that kind of told you what you're supposed to do there, or how that works. Or for that matter, if you're playing with 3,
Yikes. Yeah.
are you playing with 2 full decks, or are you playing with 1.5 decks? Like, what do they want you to do? They don't really give you any guidance there. Did you have the same experience or questions, or no?
I did, and that was perplexing to me when I first got it. I threw uh, the 2-player game out and then later played the 4-player game, and I was like, wait a second, what am I supposed to do? But I
Yeah.
thought about it, and I was like, well, why don't we just leave the deck as it is, as it's shuffled in. Now, the other question is those scout ships.
Yeah.
You could just take half of those. And
Right.
I don't remember if there's rules for that or not. With a three-player, do you take half of the scout chips from the second one and copy them? Because that is, well, okay, that's right. That's an unlimited supply anyway. Because when you trash those actually go back onto the pile, so they
Right.
can be rebought. They don't go into like out of the game. So that's right.
Right.
That's right. I convinced myself that it didn't matter. Because I figured out, well, let's if I get the same card that I shouldn't have the same card of, well, then it's just the same as randomly getting it out of the one deck anyway. So it's
Uh-huh.
just the chances of getting the cards. The distribution to me seemed to be the same.
Okay.
Because I don't think there's any one-off cards in the deck, and I haven't researched this to back it up, but I think I looked through when I first got it, and I looked like I said, okay, so there's at least two or three of each card in the deck. So if I mix them all together, the probability is going to be the same. Maybe not
Okay.
exactly the same, but to me, it didn't seem to be a huge issue. So once you threw all the decks together and threw the scout ships together, and I haven't honestly from playing it, and that's how I've played two-player games and with you know 4 players worth of cards. I
Right.
haven't noticed a discrepancy. I haven't been looking for one, but
Okay.
yeah,
Fair enough. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. And, maybe there'll be an FAQ or something that'll be released that will kind of answer some of those questions in the future if it hasn't been done already.
yeah.
These things usually go up pretty quickly. Well, thanks for taking the time to review that game with me. The latest, greatest deck builder, fast, thematic, fun, easy to learn, easy to play, some interesting decisions, fantastic card synergies. That's Star Realms. So, the next game we're going to take a look at here on the Long View is a new release from AEG. This is the title Istanbul. It's released in 2014 by Rudriger Dorn. Very famous designer, known for games such as Jambo, also games such as Goa, and more recently Il Vecchio. So Rudriger Dorn has designed this game, Istanbul. It's for 2 to 5 players, and it's suggested for ages 10 and up. The playing time is listed at about 50 minutes, and I'd say that's probably pretty accurate in my experience. Somewhere between 45 minutes. You can get it knocked down a little bit once you're familiar with the game. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about it, other than the fact it's from a designer that I like, is the fact that it is a Kennerspiel des Jahres nominee currently, even as I am recording this. So this is a very interesting title. So let's dive right in and take a look. So Istanbul is basically made of tiles, very large rectangular tiles, and you're going to put them out in an array. There are 4 tiles in a row, and what you're going to be doing is each tile is going to depict a different location in this sort of market area of Istanbul. And what you're going to be doing is you are going to be sending your merchant, which is represented by a round wooden disc, and your merchant's assistants, which are represented by thinner little wooden discs of the same color. Your merchant has like a sticker on it so that you know not only by size, but also because of the sticker that that's like your merchant, and your assistants are unmarked. What you're trying to do is you're trying to go around the city with your cart. You have a nice little player mat in front of you out of nice, thick, sturdy cardboard. All of the components are actually quite nice, that nice, thick cardboard that I've grown to love over the years. And each of you has a cart. And the cart is capable of holding wares that you will gather as you kind of move around the city. The cart is also expandable. Interestingly enough, you can make your cart larger so that it's capable of holding more things. And what you're going to do is you're going to travel around this market in Istanbul, and you're going to be gathering up materials. You're going to be gathering up fruits. You're going to be gathering up some fabric and silks. You might be gathering up some spices, etc. And you're going to be using those then to do a couple of different things. You're going to be using them to buy gems, okay, buy jewels, which are represented by those nice little red acrylic plastic kind of gemstone looking things. And you're also going to be using them to get money. So you can sell them at markets. You can use money to buy these jewels or gems, and you can also use goods to buy the jewels or gems. And those are the kind of two different ways that you can do that, along with another few bonus type things, bonus type ways in which you can gain gems as well. So why am I talking about gems? Well, gems are the victory condition in this game. So in a two-player game, it's the first person, I believe, to collect 6 gems. And in a 3 to 5-player game, it's the first person to collect 5 gems. So one of the interesting things about the game is the sort of economy of the game and how it ramps up. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say that you have traveled around to the different markets and you've gathered up the materials that you need so that you can go to the area where you can buy gems. I believe it's the Sultan's Palace for goods. So you go over to the Sultan's Palace with your merchant piece and you're going to sell. So the first time that you buy a jewel, they want a piece of jewelry, which is kind of like a blue good. It kind of looks like a ring almost in the art of the game. They also want 1 fruit, 1 spice, 1 fabric, and then they also want something else of your choice. It could be any of those particular goods. So you pay those items by kind of subtracting them off of your cart that you have, and you take a gem. The gem is right on the card for the Sultan's Palace, and as soon as you take that gem, it reveals an icon underneath. That icon underneath will be a second blue ring. So then the next person who goes to the Sultan's Palace, it could be you, it could be somebody else, is now going to have to pay 2 blue rings along with 1 spice, 1 fruit, 1 fabric, and then a good of their choice. And then the next person will have to pay even more. So the items get more expensive as you go along. So this kind of leads to some interesting decisions, because what you have is you end up with a sort of escalating economy. And so it actually ends up feeling a little bit like a race game, because if you can get to these areas first, you're going to get the better deal. If you go later, it's going to be more expensive. However, that's kind of nicely offset by the fact that as you improve your cart, you're able to store more goods and you're able to get more goods. And then you also are able to acquire tiles at these 2 areas called the mosques. So you have the large mosque and you have the small mosque. And the large mosque and the small mosque each boast 2 tiles for you to be able to acquire. If you meet the requirements, you can grab one of those tiles, and it's going to give you a lasting effect in the game, something that might be of benefit to you. For example, in the one mosque, you can gain a tile that will give you a 5th assistant who will come and join your team. And this is very important for reasons I'll describe in just a moment. There's another tile that will allow you to change a die roll. There's a couple of places that you can go, very interestingly in the game. For example, there's the tea house. And when you go to the tea house, it's a place where you can kind of gamble. So what you do is you have 2 regular 6-sided dice, and you say a number. So you say a number between 3 and 12. So if I say the number 8, as long as when I roll the dice I get 8 or higher as the result, I'm going to get $8. Nice. However, if I only get like a 5, I still get $2 as kind of a consolation prize. But if you miss your target number, you're only going to get the $2. So this is another nice little decision point, right? So if you want to play a little riskier, you've got the opportunity for the big payoff. If you want to play a little more conservatively, you're probably always going to hit your number. Well, this one tile that you can acquire at the mosque that I was speaking of will allow you to take one of your dice when you go to the tea house and change it to a 4. So if I rolled a 6 and a 1, that's only 7, and I had said 8, oh boy, I'm out of luck. Well, I can actually change the 1 to a 4, and now, huzzah, I win, right? I get all the money that I had originally asked for. It also allows you to just plain flat out re-roll both dice if that's what you prefer to do. So interesting little tiles can be gained at the mosques. So there's 4 total, 2 at the large, 2 at the small. And one of the ways that you can acquire gems in this game towards the victory condition is you can actually gain a gem by getting both tiles that are at a particular mosque. So if I gain the 2 tiles at the small mosque, I get a red gem. If I get the 2 at the large mosque, I get a red gem. If I improve my wheelbarrow, my cart that I've been talking about, where I'm kind of pushing around the market to gather up my wares and then take them somewhere else to sell them, I can also gain a gem once I have reached my full capacity for my cart, which is 3 additional expansions, each of which costs money. So these are all the kind of different moving parts and pieces. There's also a gem dealer where you can just go to the gemstone dealer and pay him cash, and he'll give you a red gem. But of course, they get more expensive as the game goes on. So there's all these different ways in which you can gain these red gems, which are going to determine the victory. But it's really the way the game works that is kind of the magic in it. So first of all, what you're going to do on your turn is very simple, kind of feels like a throwback game to me, and that's one of the reasons why I think I like it so much, is you have this stack. So you have your merchant disc on top, and then you have your 4 assistants underneath. On your turn, you may move up to 1 or 2 spaces away, and you must move. You can't just stay there. So when you move, if you go to a tile where you already have one of your assistants sitting there from a previous turn, you actually pick him up again. If you get to a tile where you have none of your pieces, then you're going to be able to drop off one of your assistants, okay? And the assistant is then going to kind of take care of business for you. He's going to carry out the action of the tile because every tile has a different action. You've already heard about the moss tiles. You've already heard about the tile where you improve your cart, the Wainwright, if I'm saying that correctly. There's the tea house, there are the gemstone dealers, the sultan's palace, etc. And then there's also goods warehouses. And this is where you go to get the goods. So if I arrive at the spice warehouse, I get to automatically fill my cart to its capacity with spice. That's very nice. Now you only start off with a capacity for 2, but as you extend your cart by going to that improvement area, that Wainwright, you're going to be able to extend your cart so that instead of being able to hold 2, now you can hold 3 or 4 or even 5, right? So this is really kind of nifty because for going to one place, you get to max it out. You know, a lot of these games that you play, you go and you get 1, you know, or you go and you get 2 if you're lucky. Well, here you get everything that you want, everything that you can possibly hold, which is kind of nice. Okay. Then what happens is on your next turn, you'll pick up your stack remaining. So remember, you had 4 plus a merchant. Well, now you only have 3 because one assistant is kind of sitting off to the side gathering those spices. You're going to pick up your merchant and the remaining 3, and you'll go to another tile and you'll execute that effect, okay? So maybe I'll go to the caravan space where I can get bonus cards, okay? I get to look at 2 and keep 1. Maybe I'll go and improve my cart. Maybe I'll go somewhere else. There's all these different places you can go. But the same basic rule applies. If I go to a space and none of my assistants are there, I have to drop an assistant off to execute the action. If there was one there, though, this is kind of the nifty part, I can pick him back up and execute the action. When I pick him up, I'll execute the action, and now I have another piece underneath my merchant. Why is this important? Because if you ever run out of assistants underneath your merchant can still travel 1 to 2 spaces on the board, but your merchant can't execute any actions on his own. He can't get any benefits. So he could go to the cloth market, but he's not going to be able to get anything. He doesn't have anyone there to gather all the materials together, right? So how do you get your assistants back? Well, the one place on the board that you can go is you can go to what's called the fountain. It's kind of in the center of the board. As a matter of fact, it has to be one of the 4 tiles in the center of the board. And when you go there, all of your assistants will be called back home to you, and they'll all come back from wherever they were, scattered around the board, and they'll come underneath your merchant again. So this is nice, but it's a lost turn, and this is one of the real keys to the game. As a matter of fact, I've discovered the fewer times you can go to the fountain, generally, the better. Because when you go to the fountain, you do get your pieces back, but you didn't gain anything other than that. You actually end up it's kind of a wasted turn. It's a reset turn. So if you can plan your path carefully, going around the market and gaining benefits, but then also circling back to pick your people up as you go somewhere else, you're actually going to be more efficient. So really at heart, what the game is it's a path building optimization kind of a game. Sounds very dry, sounds very boring. Once you figure out the best path, so what? Well, here's how the designer conquered that. Because the board is made up of these tiles, it's a variable setup that you can use every single game. The game comes with 3 suggested setups, that you can explore, and there will be some optimal paths that you can discover in those 3 setups, or you can just simply arrange them any way you want. There's 2 rules about, the fountain has to be somewhere in the middle, and the gemstone dealer and the Sultan's Palace have to be separated a little bit, I think, and also the places where you use dice, the black market, which I didn't talk about. It's where you can go and grab some resources on the side, on the sly, and the tea house have to be a certain number of spaces apart. But other than that, anything goes. And so you have this wonderful arrangement that can be fresh with almost every game that you play and will present new opportunities. In addition, the game plays very differently with different numbers of players. So it plays quite well with 2 players using a very unintrusive third kind of color marker that you use in addition to your own assistance. You have one, they suggest the white pieces, one of kind of a neutral color, and the neutral color can be picked up by either color merchant. So that's kind of a neat little thing. So you can drop yours off while you're going somewhere, but then the other player can swoop in and grab them and take them. Now, normally you can only take your own color pieces. So with that one simple little change, that one little twist, it actually becomes quite an interesting 2-player game. But when you play the game with 3 or 4 or 5, the game gets really very different. And one of the reasons for that is because, of course, there's increased competition. The board doesn't grow in size. But then there's also the rule that whenever 2 merchants go to the same tile, if I arrive at a tile and there's already a merchant there from another player, I have to pay that person $2 in order to execute the effect of that tile. If there were 2 merchants already there, I'd have to pay $4. So there ends up being a lot more tactical decisions that you have to make in a larger player game, because that place you were just about to go, well, somebody else went there, and then another person went there and paid that other guy $2, and now it's like, oh my goodness, it's going to cost me $4 even to go there. I don't even have that much money. So then you have to shift on the fly. You have to think about, okay, where could I go? What could I do? What could be a better benefit for me? And so what I find really interesting is that this is one of those games that I feel is more strategic with fewer numbers of players and more tactical with larger numbers of players because of this design. So some people might view that as a flaw. They say, well, the game should be the game. But I kind of have come to view games like this as kind of a lot of bang for the buck. If I want a strategic experience, I'm going to play with 2 or 3. If I want kind of a tactical, fun, kind of chaotic experience, I'm going to go with the 5-player or maybe the 4-player, where things are going to be much less predictable. I really feel that this is it shares a lot in common with a game like Finca. For those of you who've heard of Finca, when you play Finca 2 players, you can really make some excellent predictions about where your opponent's going to go and what your opponents are looking for as far as tiles that they're trying to fulfill orders for. But when you play Finca with like 4 players, it gets kind of crazy. And you really have no way of knowing what might be available when your turn rolls around. So you kind of have to, the game then turns into a much more tactical situation of, because this person went here and this person went here, I can now move my guy over here, and that's going to get me 4 oranges. I wasn't even thinking about oranges before, but now, I can grab those, and then I need that for that tile, and I can grab that one. So in much the same way, I feel that Istanbul offers those 2 experiences as well. So lower player count, higher strategy, higher player count, more tactics. So I really kind of like that about this game, because depending on my mood, I can kind of pick either sort of mode, if you want to think of it that way. So, in closing, here's what I like about the game. I think the game is a winner. I like it much, much more than, unfortunately, Il Vecchio. That game really kind of left me cold. This game I really enjoy. I enjoy it because it's very simple. The rules are very easy to teach. You can be up and playing this game in like 5 minutes. Once you explain the tiles, the iconography is crystal clear. There's not that many of them, so it's not too confusing. The action that you can take is move 1 or 2 spaces and then execute the action. Now, there's a few pieces I didn't talk about just for the sake of brevity. There's family members and the police station and the post office and some other areas on the board that I haven't gone into details about. But suffice it to say, the rules are quite simple. The gameplay is very engaging. There's a lot of sort of subtle kind of European style interaction in the game when you play with higher player counts because of the blocking and because of the expense and things of that nature. And there's that element of the race game. You never feel like you have enough time. You're always worried that your opponent's going to grab something just before you were going to. And so that's one of the things that makes this game really, really interesting to me, and something that I really enjoy. The variable setup is genius, okay, because otherwise the game would become stale. One of the things that I didn't like about Il Vecchio and Hansa Teutonica, games of that style, is, once you kind of have this sort of path or area that you're working, you're going to kind of rinse and repeat. And you'll find with Istanbul, once you've played a particular configuration a few times, you start to learn those optimal paths and cycles, and you're just going to kind of rinse and repeat unless somebody comes in and blocks you or changes or forces you to change. Well, you don't have to worry about that because the variable board setup is going to take care of that for you. You're going to always have to explore a different route, a different way of doing things, and sometimes it becomes quite challenging. So even though the rules are simple, the mechanisms are simple, the gameplay really gives you some interesting choices that you have to consider. A lot of different things to think about. It can get quite crunchy at times, especially towards the end of the game. And yet, despite all that, it's easy to play and easy to teach. Is the theme real strong here? In my opinion, not so much. It's definitely a Euro. You're building a path, you're gathering resources, you're turning them into these gems, and then whoever gets the most, the first to 5 gems wins. That's not very thematic to me. I don't know why a merchant would be going around trying to get these red gems, and who cares if you have red gems? I mean, maybe they're so valuable that you're like a master merchant now, or you get to join the guild or something. I don't know. That it's not really provided there. So to me, the theme isn't really strong, but this is an example where I don't really care because the gameplay is so much fun and the mechanisms are so clean and engaging, and you have that great choice between tactics and strategy in this game. So I really kind of find it very refreshing. It feels like a throwback to me. It reminds me of games like El Grande, where things are kind of, or Ticket to Ride. You only have a couple of things that you can do on your turn. That's not where the fun in the game is. It's not in the laundry list of choices that you have. And trust me, I love those kind of games too, where you do have literally 15 different things you could do. Here, it's much more stripped down and streamlined, much more pleasant, very easygoing, and yet the decisions are not automatic by any stretch of the imagination. So, in my opinion, Istanbul is really a good game. I would not be surprised if it wins the Kennerspiel des Jahres. It's not a particularly heavy game, but I think when you think about the Kennerspiel Award, it is heavy for that award. For that typical family audience, it would be considered a little bit crunchy. So therefore, I think it really does stand a good chance of winning that award. I'll be curious to see what happens. So, Istanbul from AEG. Great components, beautiful artwork. Didn't mention that, but I want to. Ease of play, easy to teach, great decisions, great balance between strategy and tactics depending on the number of players. Theme, it's there if you really search for it, but you don't really need it in this game. Mechanically, it's just so sound and so much fun to play. So, thumbs up for me for Istanbul by Rudiger Dorn and published by AEG. On the show, we're actually very pleased to have the opportunity, although Joel is no longer here with me. This is future Jeff talking. I am very happy to have Alan Emmerich join us here on the show today. He is one of the co-founders of Victory Point Games from Costa Mesa, California. And this is a company that I've reviewed a few titles for recently, and I've been aware of them for quite some time because they have a very strong presence usually at the WBC, which is kind of my home board gaming sort of convention that I've been going to for years now. And so I'm really happy to have the chance to talk with Mr. Emmerich about Nemo's War and all the things that are coming up. So Alan, hello and welcome to the show.
Hello, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. It's a pleasure to have you. I've been very excited to have the chance to speak with you, just mainly about Nemo's War, but also about Victory Point in general. I've done a few reviews, and I've kind of noticed over the past couple of years, some significant changes at Victory Point in production and quality of the components and sort of the treatment that the games have been getting. I must say that Victory Point has always had a reputation for good games. Games like Circus Train, games like Zulus on the Ramparts and things like that. I mean, you always hear about Victory Point games, but they were also always known as sort of like kind of the bagged game company. And now you guys have sort of taken things to a whole different level. I'd like to not only talk to you about Nemo's War, but just about the company in general, where you're going, your new manufacturing techniques that you've been using, and the things that you're doing here in the United States, as opposed to the sort of standard model which has been overseas to Germany or overseas to China. So we got a lot of ground to cover here, if you're okay with that. But what I'd like to do is start off with Nemo's War, because that was really the subject of tonight's show.
Fantastic.
So what can you tell us about the upcoming second edition of Nemo's War? What is that going to look like? What has changed, perhaps? And what news do you have about this edition?
Well, what we do when we approach a second edition of one of our earlier games is we really like to give the team, the designer and the developer, and even the hardcore fans a second bite at the apple and see what they would really like to have in a second edition, because as you indicated, with our new production techniques, we can really do much more. And in Nemo's War, it began with myself, the developer, sitting down with Chris Taylor, the designer. Now, Chris Taylor's done a lot of games for us, and he's probably done some games you've already seen before. He works in the computer game field as his day job. He is the designer of Fallout, which a lot of people are familiar with. And we sat down and said, okay, what can we do with Nemo's War? Okay, second edition, obviously include the expansion kit, but what other things did we want? And we wanted, for example, named ships to encounter, and each ship a little more distinctive, and some having special abilities. So as you roam the seas and discover ships, there's a lot more to each encounter, and they'll be very interesting. We also wanted to make the game a bit more balanced. We got a lot of feedback from players that we didn't get the final numbers right on the play balance. I mean, they're good, but you want these things, tuning fork balance, ding, and it's great. So we're doing a lot more work dialing in the numbers. We expanded the variety of treasures that you can find. But here's what I really like. Nemo in this game is represented by 4 different motives for what you're trying to do during play.
Right.
Science, explore, anti-imperialism, and war. And in the second edition game, we've really got it figured out where each of those is a distinct game. I mean, the gameplay, what you need to do and how you need to think of that map and approach the pieces on the board is very different. So we have poured our hearts into it to figure out how to put 4 games in one box with each motive as a super clearly distinct game.
Well, that sounds really interesting, because one of the things that Joel and I were talking about was we felt that one of the great strengths of the game was the ability to sort of go down different paths. This game does not shoehorn you into any one particular direction, which you often find with solitaire games. Solitaire games can kind of, the term that Joel used was kind of put you on rails, where you're kind of heading in a particular direction and you're going to see what happens, and depending on the choices you make and other factors, including luck, you're going to come up with some sort of a result. But in Nemo's War, you really have these kind of 4 different distinctive kind of things you can go for. You're going for liberation of people who are being oppressed, or you're treasure hunting and looking for scientific discoveries, or you're fighting the imperialist powers in war and trying to sink ships. And so we already felt that there was a lot baked in there. So can you maybe give us a little bit of a hint as to how you've actually augmented those differences, because we already kind of frankly felt they were pretty well augmented to begin with?
Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. We're having a grand time with this because it's a design challenge, a development challenge, and that's what we do for fun. We really love solving these challenges. All right, let's try and break this down. Oh, first, I need to also explain that there are additional crew members. You get the chief engineer and the first officer on the Nautilus as resources,
Nice.
and there are more cards and adventures and some different endings, and everything is storyboarded. You build the deck beforehand now in 3 acts, and the pressure carefully ratchets up over each act. The first act you might think of as the tutorial. It's the pleasure cruise act before the world is really freaking out about the Nautilus. But boy, then we start to really turn the screws, and the hunt is on. And by the end of the game, oh man! Anyway, especially when you pick a war motive, you're going to be fighting tooth and nail, hammer and tongs for survival on those oceans. It's going to be great. Anyway, what we did with each motive is if you have discussed the notoriety track to see how much infamy the Nautilus and her crew have gained among the world, each motive now has a quicker sudden death ending. If you have one of the peaceful motives like science or explore, you don't get to rise too high up on the notoriety track before it's sudden defeat. You get a little more leash in anti-imperialism. You expect to fight, and you get the longest notoriety track when it's war, and that's kind of cool because there's more pushback too as your notoriety increases. The groups that come hunting you are tougher. The ships will all go in attack mode at some point and flip over to a more badass side. There's another die is added for placement of ships at the highest notoriety levels, and they're just coming after you. It's really cool.
Well, it sounds like it because it sounds like you're doing two things. It sounds like that you're building that kind of narrative arc of the game with the 3 different decks that you're going to kind of construct.
It turns into one deck, but yeah, you stack it in layers like a
right. So that as you go through it, it's going to gradually increase sort of the difficulty and the tension in the game. Right. And I really do like the change you're mentioning to the notoriety track because we did talk about that. And, I did notice when playing the game that if I went for one of those sort of peaceful what are we calling them? Nemo's motives, that right. I didn't care as much about it. I only cared about it in terms of I was more concerned usually by making sure the oceans didn't fill with ships because, that's another game sort of end sudden condition. And so if I was kind of going down the peaceful track, I would keep more of an eye on that, but I didn't care too much about notoriety. And I think that now. Yes, and it sounds like that'll be something that'll be actually an increase in the tension. So I like that. I also like that because it's logical. If you really are kind of peacefully exploring the seas, looking for new discoveries and fantastic creatures and all of these different things, then you really shouldn't be just roaming around randomly blowing up ships. I mean, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So any of that you do, you're gaining that notoriety, which is going to be counter to your stated objective, which is kind of peaceful scientific exploration. So I interpret that thematically as then, when the next time Nemo goes to a port somewhere in the Indian Ocean looking for rumors about, some great, hidden something or other, a scientific kind of discovery, a giant clam perhaps or something, people are not going to want to, they might not share that information with them because they're like, well, I heard you're really just nothing but a pirate. And I'm not going to go and tell you where that is. So I kind of like that it makes you sort of responsible for your notoriety level when you're going for a peaceful objective. So I think that sounds definitely interesting. Is there going to be any kind of updating to the graphic design? I was okay with the graphic design. Joel didn't particularly care for it. He kind of thought it was very functional, but not very attractive. Has the graphic design been updated in the second edition?
Well, thank you. I had a lot of influence in all our early graphic designs. But I'm a functional guy. I build playtest kits.
Right.
By the way, there's more oceans in the second edition Nemo map.
Oh, really?
In
Okay.
addition to the 6 major oceans, there's little transitional oceans in between. So that movement between each one is essentially one movement point, but you get a lot more feel of the Nautilus moving around the world. And the other oceans can have ships and they fill up and there's treasures and things. So it's really neat. Your question was graphics.
Yes.
My answer is Ian O'Toole. Now, Ian O'Toole is a veteran game illustration and graphics layout guy in Perth, Australia. For the geographically impaired, that's the lower left corner of Australia. And so he's kind of isolated out there. But he's very passionate about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Nemo's War. And he asked us to do the graphic work for Nemo's War Second Edition as a passion project, which means we could afford it. And so that's all coming together. Now he's been announced, and you can see his stuff. It's up on Board Game Geek if you look at artist Ian O'Toole, and it's great stuff. Now he's been in the background with development. He's been helping us play test, and he's seeing how the sausage is made. But we're getting close to the final beta components now. So he's researching ships, and I haven't asked him this, but I get the feeling that those ships are gonna be pretty amazing. Maybe individual, if we could find the references. Oh my goodness, but his concepts for the map and the characters, they've all been awesome. So at some point very soon, I am going to pass everything over to Ian, and this will be his project. We're wrapping up beta testing here pretty quick. We've got the last bunch of changes I want to inspect, but I have a good feeling about everything we've done because we're doing it with a lot of testing knowledge.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for letting me know about that and letting everybody else out there know. It sounds like you have a really passionate artist who's working on it. As I said, I myself, I kind of I'm a Martin Wallace fan too, so I never met a chart or a table or a track that I didn't like. I like that functionality of having things right in front of me and not having to have off-board stuff or having to keep track of it myself. But I think Joel, kind of coming more from a sort of artistic background, was looking at it and thinking, man, I think this could look a lot prettier. And it sounds like he's going, to be delivering that because this is something he's really passionate about. And, when you get people working, regardless of what the field is, in something that they feel passionate about, the results are always amazing. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Can you tell us anything about the schedule for this game? Because I know Joel wanted to know about that. What are you thinking as far as a timeline for this?
Well, by the way, like you, I'm an ergonomics guy. I just like to sit down and have everything within eye range and fingertip range, and I don't want to have to pick up the rules once I get going. My player aid and what's in front of me should make everything go. So, and Nemo's War Second Edition certainly does that.
Excellent.
As for release dates are like Fight Club. The first rule about release dates is we don't talk about release dates. The game will be ready when it's ready.
Okay.
We're a print-on-demand company,
right?
And when it's close enough to talk about a release date, when we're starting to build marketing materials and things like that for it, we'll talk about it.
That sounds good.
Right now, we'd rather get the game right. And like I said, for us, we don't announce a release date when we ship it off to China to be printed. For us, we only walk into the back room and it's printed, 15 minutes later.
Right. Well, that leads me into the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, which is since I have the opportunity to speak with you personally, I'm really kind of fascinated with the journey that Victory Point has been going through. You have a small startup company, people who are just very passionate about gaming, not looking to make $1 million, doing it because you love it, and kind of really handcrafting a lot of stuff. And then, and having, I understand from reading the history kind of your company on your website, you have like college interns who come in and they kind of learn the business, they learn their craft, they help out the company while they're there. And now you've kind of like you've evolved even another step further. Still the same core group of people as far as I can see, but you're now with this new manufacturing process, which is actually, I think, the only one that's being done here in the United States, and it's all based on laser technology. Yes. So can you tell me something about sort of the journey of Victory Point, just for a few minutes, for people out there who are interested in hearing about this story and this manufacturing process?
Well, we began in my attic at my house. Myself, a couple of my students, and my longtime gaming buddy, Vince DiNardo. And we thought, I'm sending my students off to intern at big computer game companies who shall remain nameless, like Blizzard and EA. And they would come back after these internships marked no blood. I mean, they sucked all the blood out of them when they were interns at these companies, right? And I thought, that's really terrible, because what did they really learn except how to be abused as a make art button or a write code button? They really didn't get to see the elephant. They really didn't get to experience more of the process. And so I said, crud. Well, I didn't want to start another game company. I've kicked that can down the road before, and but I thought about it, and what was I going to do, and would that really make sense? And so we had a meeting in my attic, and I said, well, nobody has two nickels to rub together, so I had to come up with all the money. I was cleaning out my game collection, just finally dusting off some games up in my attic, when I opened one of some old chestnut from back in the 80s, and I looked inside, and there was $6,000 that I had won previously in a poker tournament and completely forgotten about. Well, I live with three other guys named Alan, and you don't leave money lying around, and you got to kind of stash it somewhere. And so it's like, well, that must be a sign that this little game company is to be started. And I took that capital and bought some nice color inkjet printers, investigated the Ellison Prestige Pro die cutting system, which is used by a lot of schools, but I had them make custom dies so that I could create game counters with them. And with those humble beginnings, we got Victory Point Games started as, kind of a print and play, print on demand company in my attic. And for the longest time, we were just like, it was me and Vinny. We were two guys in an attic. Vinny was building everything, and I did everything else. I did the website and the graphics and the development and the marketing and the packing and receiving and the shipping orders. I did everything. And Vinny was just cranking out games as fast as people could order them. So, and that lasted, well, we moved out of that attic 4 years later to a little place here in Costa Mesa, which is right across the street from the school I teach at. I'm a full-time game design and prototyping teacher at the Art Institute of California in Orange County. And so right across the street, there's a industrial park, commerce park, and we got a small unit there. And we've grown to a larger unit since then now. And it's been 7 years, and in that time, we keep listening to our fans, and they say, well, I really like your games, but, it's kind of like from the musical A Chorus Line, dance 10, looks 3.
Right.
Our games had dance. We had gameplay, and that's all we had. We were competing against very serious boxed game products on store shelves, and all we had was gameplay. Now, that got us pretty far, but we knew that we needed to upgrade, and that was going to take more capital and lots of leaps of faith. But eventually we got our counters to be made on a laser cutter with thicker stock, and we've been getting that dialed in ever since. And every time we figure something else out, they're a little better. They're really looking good now. We used to die cut cards with a big die cutter, but now they actually run through a nice Duplo, slitting, scoring, folding machine, and they come out as beautiful cards. We used to round the corners with a foot press corner rounder, but now we have an electric one, and it's much better. We got boxes now. We had to we had to find a box solution so that we could box. Like, people wanted boxes, and so I liked Columbia Games. I always thought their stuff was pretty neat. Theirs came in a folded cardboard box with a nice paper sleeve, and I thought, well, we could probably do that. So we got red, what some customers have called pizza boxes, that we fold up and put our games in. But damn it, that bright red box flying the crimson banner of Victory Point Games is pretty iconic. I was just at Consim World Expo, and we have bright red bags that we, when our customers buy a game, we put them in these big bright red bags with Victory Point Games on them. And as I stood at the ballroom looking over, the monster games and the pickup games and the foyer tables and stuff, all I had to do was spot the red. And sure enough, those were Victory Point Games boxes and bags. And it's like, I just nodded to myself and said, that looks good. I like that. So there's a little marketing thing for you. The bright red pizza box at Victory Point Games. But they're sturdy as all get up.
Yes, they
and
are.
They got us into stores, and that's really a huge victory point for the little game company.
Well, thanks for sharing all of that with me, and with everybody out there listening, just a little bit of a history of the company, because it really has grown quite a bit in the production end of it. And as you said, the gameplay's always been there. It's just been sort of a question of trying to take that last step into some of those production things, like the boxes, like the counters being a little bit thicker, and things of that nature. And it really
nice rules books now too. We got a Canon Image Press printer, and it's doing great.
Yes, I've noticed that as well. You have the nice glossy kind of covers to them, and color on the inside. When I looked at the sort of first edition rules for some of the games, they were sort of individual sheets, not always bound together, and things of that nature. So yeah, this is another huge step forward. And I've been very, very pleased with the card stock, the card quality. They're easy to shuffle. They have a real nice look to them. They're flexible. They're not super rigid. Sometimes you get cards and they're a nice thickness and they have a nice kind of gloss to them, but they're super, super rigid and hard to shuffle. No. And that's not the case with the cards that I've seen in games like Circus Train and I Say Homes and things of that.
Funny you should mention cards, because that's the next component we're upgrading. That I Say Homes, we just did a second edition Kickstarter, which ends in about 3 hours. And the big thing is that we're making that card game on something called Plaper, which is made by a company, Arjo Wiggins in France. But it's a little thinner than the paper we're using, but it's made like traditional playing cards. It's like 3 layers with a black center, and it's got a little snap to it. So I'm glad you like it. I love our cards, but I think we're moving on up, to the east side with this with this Plaper. And I think you'll find it yet another incremental component quality improvement from the little game company.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to seeing that. And congratulations, by the way, on the I Say Homes Kickstarter. I just did a review of that on the last episode that I did, and noted when I was kind of right before I recorded that and looking at the research and said, oh, man, they hit that one quite comfortably, actually.
Funded in 22 hours.
Yeah, and so that just goes to show I think the interest level out there, and the success of the company, and people are hungry for these second editions, and I know that I'm very hungry for this next edition of Nemo's War. So I thank you for taking the time to tell us about some of the innovations that are going to be coming up in that second edition. I thank you for giving us a little bit of a history of Victory Point Games and walking us through some of the changes that have occurred and some of the plans for the future, including this use of Plaper and all of that. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me today here on the show.
Well, it was my honor, and let me wrap up with this thought. This 7-year journey, the sudden success of this Kickstarter, what that has taught me is that the best people are gamers. They have great hearts. They rally to your support when you're trying to do good. And it's good people like you, our customers, who have made this happen. Our success is their story. And I am humbly thankful to everyone for that.
Well, thank you very much, and we appreciate that, and I know I also appreciate, and it's hard to say this, without sounding jingoistic in some way, which I really honestly don't feel that way. I believe we are moving towards a more global, society and a global world where hopefully we can figure out things a little bit better than we have now and get along a little better and do things a little better together, as human beings. But I also, have family history in manufacturing in this country. And there's always been a little part of me that's been sad that while I love the quality of, the German components and things, and, you apparently really can't argue with the price point in China, I really love the idea that, you guys have found a way to make this work at a reasonable price point by manufacturing here in the United States. And that kind of makes me feel hopeful that maybe you're proving, even right now, that this model can work and that this kind of technology can work. And with new innovations like Plaper that you're talking about, and this laser die cutting, I think that down the road, my hope is we're going to see even more manufacturing here begin to pop up again in the United States, and kind of maybe get us into that sort of global gaming marketplace. I know it's not a huge marketplace, but it's one that seems to be growing, and it's an area that I'd like to see maybe a little bit more done here in the United States. And that's not meant to disrespect anybody else's manufacturing facilities.
Right.
It's just, as a United States citizen, I was really encouraged, when I learned that, hey, this stuff's actually done here, and that's very different. That's not anything that I've really heard of before. So I want to thank you for looking into that and making that happen here, because all the other channels and routes are open. Everybody knows them. Everybody knows how to use them. The price points are fairly set, I think, at this point. Yeah. There's a lot of standardization of components. And so it would be very easy to just go that route. Hey, we're going to put it on Kickstarter. We'll calculate in the bond. We'll calculate in the shipping, the manufacturing costs. We'll send some people over to do some inspections if we're doing it in China. We'll make sure we get proofs, and, we'll just do it that route. I mean, that's the route everybody else does. Yep. And we get great games that way. But the fact that you're saying, no, we're going to do it here, I really appreciate
print on
that.
Demand.
Right, which is also nice because then you don't have to worry so much about inventory levels now, do you?
Nope, sure don't.
Right, and that's another advantage that I think other companies, would be curious about. Instead of saying, well, boy, what's my print run going to be? Is my print run going to be 1,000, 3,000, 10,000? What's my print run going to be? And if the game's a success, then you're going to have a Caverna problem. Okay, well, the game's a success and everybody wants it, nobody has it. People are screaming from the rooftops, get me this game, and no one has it. We got to wait for the reprint. Well, you guys
and then the reprint is a big gamble because now you got to reprint more, and there's already that many sales done.
Right.
And we'll be able to sell that many more.
Exactly. Whereas you guys are kind of showing that, hey, we can do a print-on-demand thing so that we don't have to worry about being saddled with stock. If a game doesn't do as well as we hope, and every publisher out there, and I'm fortunate enough to know a few of them, personally, I know they all believe in their product, and they're not going to publish a game if they don't think it's good. They're not going to publish it if they don't think it's going to sell. It's their money. But at the end of the day, sometimes it doesn't. And then you have this stock, and you got to figure out, well, we got to warehouse it. We got to figure out how to liquidate it. How much money are we going to lose? Whereas when you do print on demand, as your company's model is, you're not really in that situation. You don't have to be stuck sitting on inventory. And so
look at it this way. Nothing really has to go out of stock. I mean, we're still selling games that we published 7 years ago.
Yeah, and that's really an interesting concept too. And I didn't even think of that, but you're 100% right. Obviously it's your company, but I never really thought of that. But you're absolutely right. It's like you don't ever have to worry about it going out of print because as long as you maintain those files and as long as you maintain those materials, you can print it out anytime you want to. So that's really kind of nifty too, from a gamer's kind of perspective, because often, you get frustrated because if you feel like you missed the boat on a printing and then it doesn't get picked up or it doesn't get reprinted, now you're looking at sort of almost sometimes extortionist prices in order to try to get the chance to play a game when, your company's model is, well, if you want it, it's in the catalog, order it, and we'll print it out and ship it to you. And it's like, wow, that's nice.
That's right.
You don't have to worry about that. So, well, I was trying to wrap up, and then we went into this other segue here, but I think it was a good segue to get into, because I think it points out some of the things that are unique about Victory Point games, and also kind of trying to take that. It's going to sound like a horrible pun, but that longer view of what's coming down the pike and what are some possible things that could be happening in the future, not only for your company but in the hobby in general. I think it's really important to kind of point these things out. So you're in the vanguard once again.
Here, let me tell you one more crazy thing about the future is I'm not going to be here forever. I am training everybody here to run this company and own this company. And my exit strategy is to just incorporate, hand all the kids who've been with me, all this kids, they're 20s, 30s, 40s kids, hand them their shares and wish them luck because they built this company. They deserve it.
Well, that's fantastic. And, as you said, when you have people that, you make them feel valued and you don't just work them like dogs, you bring in people who are passionate about what they're doing, then they care not only about the product, but they care about the company. And so I think you're going to be leaving things in good hands would be my suspicion. So
absolutely. That's what I'm working toward.
Well, Alan, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us here and shed a little light on the game and on the company. And I know we wrapped this up a little bit before, but we're going to do it again. And this time, I promise I won't get us onto another segue. So thanks again for...
Thank you, Jeff.
Not a problem. And I look forward to maybe chatting with you again in the future.
All right. You've been a terrific host.
Thank you very much. You have a great night.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode of The Long View. Once again, I want to thank Alan Emmerich for joining me. I want to thank Joel Eddy for coming back and talking with me again about the great game of Nemo's War. I want to say also thank you out there to the Dice Tower and the Dice Tower Network. The Long View is a proud member of the Dice Tower Network, and I hope that you will go and check out all of the resources they have to offer for those of us who love board games. I also want to let listeners out there know that I am going to be attending the WBC, as well as, it looks like, Gen Con this year. So, very excited to have the opportunity to go there for the first time, and I hope to have the chance to meet some of you out there. If you would like to stop by and say hello, I will be more than likely at the Stronghold booth during the day, helping out there, and perhaps you can also find me at the Dice Tower booth as well. Or maybe just somewhere looking at games, trying to buy some games, or trying to play some games. So I hope to run into you at either the WBC or Gen Con. I also, of course, want to give a special shout out to my sponsor, GameSurplus.com. GameSurplus.com is still your best choice for online board gaming purchases. You know their prices are fantastic. You know their customer service is legendary. So why not stop by and check out and see if they have some copies of Istanbul, perhaps, or Nemo's War for you. I also want to send a special greeting out to my local game store, the Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. If you are living in northeastern Pennsylvania or northern New Jersey or southern New York, I suggest you take a little ride on down to Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, conveniently located off of Interstate 80, right on Main Street. The Gamer's Edge has a large and still growing collection of board games for those of us out there who love that, and they have plenty of space to open up those games, punch them, and play them right there. The shop is well lit with a friendly staff, and they offer a lot of different services for board gamers. I'm there Monday nights teaching new games and running demos, and Robin and the rest of the crew there will be happy to show you any new game or any game that you would like to see or talk about. So that's the Gamer's Edge in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. So for Joel Eddy and myself and Alan Emmerich, I want to say thanks to everybody out there for listening, and have a great night.